Chapter 1. The inciting incident. I have never known Monsieur Hercule Poirot to be at a loss for intrigue, but on that misty autumn morning even he seemed unsettled. It was just past dawn when I arrived at the weathered footbridge that spans the River Sedgewood, an ancient crossing of worn oak planks and iron railings mottled with rust. The mist clung to the water's surface like a silken shroud, muffling the world in a soft grey haze. From the far bank came the distant toll of the church bell, each peal resonating like a heartbeat in the stillness. Poirot stood at the centre of the footbridge, his little grey cells visibly in turmoil. His waxed moustache bristled with emotion. I had never before seen in him something between concern and foreboding that I could scarcely name. He wore his customary dark morning coat, but even that, in the diffused light, seemed sombre. "Monsieur Poirot," I called softly as I approached, "you asked me to join you immediately." He did not turn at first, staring instead at the swirling water below. Then, with a gentle tap of his cane, he pointed to a small sodden parcel wedged between two planks. "Monsieur Hastings," he said in his gentle Belgian accent, "you see that?" I frowned. The package was wrapped in coarse brown paper, tied with thin string and, most unsettling, stained with what looked like dark crimson. I knelt carefully and picked it up, noting its weight and the oddly warm dampness. A letter, I guessed. The edges of the paper were torn, and a faint odour of violets mixed with something metallic clung to it. Poirot nodded gravely. "Perhaps, but I suspect more than simple correspondence lies within." He motioned upstream, where two figures emerged from the fog. Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard, marching with hurried steps, and Dr. Franklin, the local coroner, carrying a leather case. Both men wore expressions of tense urgency. As they reached us, Japp removed his bowler hat and offered it to Poirot in deference. "Sorry to trouble you, Poirot," he panted, "but we have a situation." Poirot inclined his head, his eyes never leaving the parcel in my hands. "I should hope so, Inspector. Pray enlighten us." Japp passed a folded sheet of paper to Poirot. "We found this in Lady Rathbone's summer house, just half a mile from here. It's a threatening note, signed only a friend. It warns that a life will be taken at sunrise on the footbridge." He glanced at his watch. "It's now 5 minutes past sunrise." A chill wind stirred the mist and ruffled Poirot's hair. Sunrise was at exactly 6:15 this morning. He tapped the sheet. And what did the note say, precisely? Dr. Franklin cleared his throat. It read, "At the moment the first light touches these boards, justice will be done. A killer walks among you, and he shall be revealed by his own hands." After that, only 2 words. "Beware, S." I looked at Poirot. He turned now, regarding us all with those piercing grey eyes. "Lady Rathbone was hosting a small assembly of guests at her estate last night," Japp continued, "all prominent. Sir Geoffrey Murray, the novelist Evangeline Lowe, Colonel Huxley of the Bengal Lancers, and Lady Rathbone's nephew, Gerald Halcroft. The party broke up near midnight. She claims to have been the last to leave the summer house, and she saw no one else on this bridge." Poirot walked slowly toward the parcel in my hand and surveyed it as though it were a priceless gem. Then he untied the string with deliberate care, revealing beneath the wrapping a small wooden box intricately carved with ivy leaves. The lid was ajar, and inside lay a tarnished locket. I held my breath as Poirot lifted it forth. The locket swung, open at his touch, disclosing 2 miniature portraits, one of Lady Rathbone in her youth, and the other, a startling discovery, of a man I did not recognize, his features handsome but heavy with melancholy. Beneath the portraits was a slip of paper, half soaked. "It ends here." Dr. Franklin recoiled slightly. "My word, there must be blood on the paper." "All the more reason to handle it cautiously," Poirot murmured, slipping on a pair of white gloves he produced from his coat pocket. He unfolded the paper and held it aloft. "See how the script trembles, as though written by a hand seized with fear." I surveyed the gathering gloom, the inspector's sceptical stare, Franklin's clinical interest, and Poirot's own rapt attention. And then I felt it, a tremor in the stillness, as though some invisible current had shifted. The locket, the note, the coming of dawn. These were not mere coincidences, but the turning of a knife in the heart of this tranquil village. "Inspector," Poirot said, handing back the locket and the note, "this is no idle threat. Someone intends murder. Perhaps the victim is already here, waiting for that first touch of sunlight." Japp looked troubled. "We've already searched the bridge and found nothing, no body, no evidence of a struggle." "Precisely," Poirot replied, "because the tragedy has yet to occur. But it will, and our task is to prevent it, or at least understand it fully." He closed the locket with a snap and returned the box to me. "Monsieur Hastings, we must notify the household immediately. I wish to gather all who were present last night at Lady Rathbone's estate, and I wish them here within the hour. For if a life is to be taken on these boards, I must know who stands ready to cast that fatal stone." As Japp and Franklin hurried away to carry out his instructions, Poirot stood for a moment gazing at the eastern horizon, where the sun struggled to break through the mist. Turning to me, he placed a gloved hand on my shoulder. "My dear Hastings," he said quietly, "it is here, on this humble footbridge, that our drama shall play out. The stage is set, the players assembled, and the first note of our symphony of crime has sounded. It is up to my little grey cells to ensure that justice is struck before the sun completes its ascent." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle upon me like the morning dew. The ripple of water below seemed to echo his resolve, and I knew that this would be a puzzle worthy of his greatest skill. Chapter 2. The First Clues. The motorcar's gravel crunch on the drive echoed through the mist as Lady Rathbone swept from the vehicle, her silk morning shawl trailing behind her. Poirot stood near the railing, hands clasped behind his back, while I lingered at his side, the creaking boards beneath my feet still resonating with the tension of discovery. Inspector Japp and Dr. Franklin, joined now by Sergeant Barnes, moved in measured inspection of the scene. Yet it was Poirot's keen gaze that saw the smallest anomaly. "Let us begin, Hastings," Poirot whispered, voice low with purpose. "The first clues are often the most deceptive. They demand our full attention." I followed him to the far end of the bridge, where the stones of the riverbank sloped gradually into the water. Dr. Franklin knelt beside a tuft of reeds. "Footprints," he announced, pointing to 3 distinct impressions in the soft mud, one large and booted, another smaller, narrow-soled, and a third that barely registered, perhaps the edge of a slipper, all leading toward the water. Poirot crouched to examine them. Notice how the boot print is crispest, as though the wearer paused here deliberately. The narrow sole pattern is faint, suggesting haste or hesitation. But this third print, he tapped lightly, is blurred. Someone stood here, then shifted. Wait, a sign of indecision. I crouched to peer over his shoulder and felt a shiver. Do you think the killer came this way? Threw something into the river? Perhaps, Poirot replied. But one must also consider the possibility of misdirection. A savage mind might plant false paths to confound us. He rose and beckoned me back onto the bridge. There, at the centre plank where the locket had been found, Poirot's keen eye caught something I had overlooked. A tiny, irregular scratch on the wood surface, perpendicular to the grain. "Look, Hastings," he murmured, "this scratch is fresh. It does not belong to the general wear of the bridge." I knelt to see. It was a short line, scarcely 3 inches long, as though a sharp point had been dragged in anger or accident. But what could it signify? Poirot produced a magnifying glass from his coat, inspecting the mark with relish. "This," he declared, "is the first clue. A small blade slipped, perhaps during a struggle, or a purposeful carving. Notice the angle, from left to right, as though the hand was moving away from the heart." He pressed the glass lightly to the wood. "We shall take a cast of this mark later. It may tell us the blade's width, and thus the type of knife." Meanwhile, Inspector Japp was examining the parcels box again. "Come, Poirot," Japp called. "You must see this." He lifted the lid of the carved ivy box, revealing the empty cushion that had once held the pearl. Poirot nodded, then turned to me. "The pearl you found earlier. Where did you discover it?" he asked. "In the moss, beneath the railing," I replied. "It gleamed under the misty light." Poirot tucked the pearl into a small glass vial. A pearl is an odd token for a threat. It suggests someone with taste, and perhaps passion. Pearls are gifts of love. Yet here it lies, discarded. He held the vial to the light. We must learn who among our suspects has access to such a possession. At that moment, Lady Rathbone approached, her composure strained. "Monsieur, Poirot, Inspector Japp, what have you discovered?" Her eyes flicked nervously between the scratched plank and the vial in Poirot's hand. "Madame," Poirot said with gentle courtesy, "we have discovered signs of tampering, footprints that approach the bridge, and a missing pearl from your locket. Might I ask, do you habitually wear that locket?" Lady Rathbone drew the chain from her neck and handed it over. The same intimate ivy-carved box sat nestled in her dressing-case that morning, she explained, but the pearl was indeed missing when she donned the locket. She studied the empty setting with a quiver in her voice. "I cannot fathom why anyone would remove it, or why they would leave the locket here." "Precisely," Poirot replied, "which suggests the removal was intentional, and the abandonment accidental." He handed back the locket. "Thank you, madame. Your cooperation is most helpful." As Lady Rathbone's motor car rolled away, Japp turned to Poirot. "So we have a blade scratch, 3 sets of footprints, missing pearl, and a baffling note. What next?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "We turn our attention to the suspects, those gathered last night at the estate. But before that, There is one more clue. He pointed to a corner of the bridge where the moss was unexpectedly absent, revealing a triangular patch of bare wood. See here, Hastings. That patch is too clean. Someone stepped there and brushed away the moss deliberately. I bent low to examine it. The surrounding moss was damp and spongy. This area was dry and worn smooth. Perhaps someone used that spot to steady themselves while handling the locket, or carving the scratch. Exactly. Poirot produced a small brush and jar of powder from his evidence bag, an improvisation, he admitted, but one that often served. He dusted the bare patch gingerly, then lifted the brush to show a smattering of fibres clinging to the powder. Dark wool interlaced with fine threads of crimson. Textile fibres, he murmured, and red silk. He placed them in a glassine envelope. We shall match these to the clothing of each suspect. Inspector Japp frowned. Silk? Whoever left that mark was wearing a fine garment. This rules out any workman or local peasant. He whistled low. So one of our high society guests slipped these fibres. Poirot nodded. And that is why we must examine each guest's clothing and background, particularly those who might carry red silk near their person. He paused, glancing at the distant house lights of Lady Rathbone's estate through the morning haze. Hastings, gather our notes. We shall proceed there now. The first clues are in hand, and the true challenge is to assemble them into a coherent whole. As we stepped off the bridge, I felt the weight of Poirot's resolve, his conviction that even the smallest sign could unlock the entire case. The scratch in the wood, the footprints, the lost pearl, the silk fibres, like puzzle pieces strewn across the stage. And at the heart of it all lay the promise of revelation, though the path to it remained shrouded in mist. We climbed into the waiting landau and drove back to the estate, the river slipping silently beside us. In the carriage, Poirot closed his eyes in contemplation, his little grey cells already at work. I pressed the glass vial of pearl close to my chest, wondering which guest last possessed that delicate orb, and whether it might hold the key to preventing the tragedy foretold at dawn. Chapter 3. The gathering of suspects. The sun had climbed higher by the time we reached Lady Rathbone's drawing-room, its stained glass windows casting fragmented rainbows across oriental carpets and polished mahogany. Lady Rathbone herself stood by the hearth, her posture rigid with anxiety. Around her, the circle of suspects assembled: Sir Geoffrey Murray, Evangeline Lowe, Colonel Huxley, and Gerald Halcroft. Each carried an expression of wary curiosity, suspicion flickering in their eyes as they took in Poirot, Inspector Japp, Dr. Franklin, and me. Poirot swept into the room with measured grace, his gaze darting from one face to the next. He raised a slender finger, beckoning to the mantel where a lineup of chairs awaited. Mes amis, I thank you for your prompt arrival. Pray be seated. His tone was polite, but carried an unmistakable authority. One by one they sat, Sir Geoffrey in a high-backed armchair, Evangeline on a cushioned settee, Colonel Huxley on an ottoman near the window, and Gerald upon a spindle-legged chair beside the fireplace. Lady Rathbone offered tea and biscuits, but no one had the appetite to accept. The air was taut, as though the slightest word might snap the fragile tension. Poirot waited until the tea set was safely put aside before speaking. Last evening's gathering was most amiable, yes? Yet this morning a tragedy was threatened, he began, surveying them with intent. A note was delivered, warning that a life would be taken at sunrise upon the very footbridge you yesterday crossed in peace. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Fortunately, no murder has occurred yet, but the threat remains. It is my duty to investigate, and yours to assist. Sir Geoffrey shifted. He was tall and lean, with hawkish features that Benedick himself might envy. His voice was cultured but edged with exasperation. "I cannot believe any one of us would stoop to such a threat," he declared. "We are all friends of Lady Rathbone, gathered in good faith." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, but, Monsieur Murray, appearances can be deceiving." He leaned forward. "Tell me, when you left the summer-house last night, were you alone?" Sir Geoffrey's eyes flickered toward Lady Rathbone, then away. "I walked back with Colonel Huxley. We paused at the footbridge to admire the moonlight upon the water." He nodded at Huxley. "Is that not so, Colonel?" Colonel Huxley, a broad-shouldered veteran draped in a scarlet waistcoat, inclined his head. He cleared his throat. "Yes, I accompanied Sir Geoffrey. The night was so still that the river looked like polished silver." He glanced at Evangeline. "Miss Lowe remarked upon it as well." Evangeline Lowe, the young novelist with fiery hair and emerald eyes, frowned. "I left shortly after you both did. I wanted air, and the gardens were too damp. I walked alone." She spoke crisply, but a tremor in her voice betrayed unease. Poirot raised a gloved hand. "All recollections are valuable, mes amis. We will examine them in good order. Now, let us consider the locket and the missing pearl." He reached beneath his jacket and produced the delicate ivy-carved box. "This belonged to Lady Rathbone," he said, placing it on the low table. "Opened here as Monsieur Hastings. Discovered. Gerald Halcroft, Lady Rathbone's nephew and heir to the estate, paled. He was slender, neatly dressed, with anxious hands that twisted at his cuffs. My aunt told me she had shown it to me at supper, but I do not recall seeing the pearl removed." He stared at the empty setting. "It was there, then?" Poirot nodded. "Indeed, and yet this morning the pearl was gone. It was found beneath the railing of the bridge." He glanced at me. "Monsieur Hastings discovered it, correct?" I inclined my head. "I did, Monsieur Poirot." It lay half buried in moss. Lady Rathbone shivered. "My pearl. It was a gift from my late husband. I cannot bear the thought of it mistreated." Poirot's moustache twitched sympathetically. "A sentimental loss, to be sure, but the pearl is also an important clue. Do any of you recognize it?" He held the vial beneath the lamplight. Evangeline leaned forward. "It is a perfect sphere, south. See by its lustre. Very rare." Sir Geoffrey's brows rose. "My collection contains pearls, but none match this exactly." Colonel Huxley shook his head. "I cannot say I have ever owned such a treasure." Gerald swallowed. "Neither do I." Poirot placed the vial on the table. "Then we must consider who had the opportunity to remove it, and the knowledge to appreciate its value." He turned to Lady Rathbone. "Madame, was your dressing-table secured?" She glanced anxiously at her nephew. "Yes, locked each night. Only Gerald and I have the key." "Two suspects already, perhaps," Poirot observed. He pivoted to Japp. "Inspector, may I have a list of those present last evening?" Japp produced a small notebook. Here, Monsieur Poirot, Sir Geoffrey Murray, Miss Evangeline Lowe, Colonel Huxley, Mr. Gerald Halcroft, Lady Rathbone herself, and 2 staff members, Mrs. Fairchild, the housekeeper, and Mr. Bennet, the butler. Poirot tapped his chin. We shall speak with all of them. But first, I wish to learn more of your relationships, mes amis. Trust is a rare thing in these matters. He addressed Sir Geoffrey. You are a novelist, sir. Yes, Sir Geoffrey replied, straightening. I have published several detective novels. Surely that makes me proficient in criminal thought. Poirot smiled. On the contrary, Monsieur Murray, a writer's imagination can obfuscate reality. Reality does not always follow the neat logic of fiction. Sir Geoffrey bristled but said nothing. Poirot's attention moved to Evangeline. Miss Lowe, as a writer as well, you surely understand human motive. She drew in a breath. I understand pain, she said softly, and I know secrets can fester until they destroy us. Poirot's gaze lingered. You speak as one who has experienced personal loss. Her eyes glistened. She hesitated, then nodded. My brother disappeared 10 years ago. No trace. It coloured my life. Poirot noted her trembling hands. A loss like that can harden one's understanding of despair and resentment. Thank you for your candour. He turned to Colonel Huxley. Colonel, your service in India must have given you unique insights into human nature. The Colonel's jaw tightened. I have seen men do terrible things under stress. Mercy is often a luxury in war. Poirot inclined his head. Yet war teaches one to value life, does it not? Or to despise it? The Colonel met his gaze evenly. Both, perhaps. Finally, Poirot faced Gerald. Mr. Halcroft, your inheritance of this estate is considerable. Are you close to your aunt? Gerald swallowed again. She raised me after my father died young. We were companions. Poirot's eyes softened. Yet inheritance can strain even filial affection. Thank you. A hush fell, broken only by the ticking of a grand clock. Poirot straightened and clasped his hands. We have begun to map the terrain of this mystery. Relationships, opportunities, and motives. Tomorrow we will explore the scene once more by daylight and question each individual in turn. For now, I ask you to rest, though I know that is little comfort. Lady Rathbone forced a smile. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. As we withdrew from the room, the suspects exchanged wary glances. I followed Poirot down the corridor, where he stopped beneath a portrait of Lady Rathbone's late husband. Note, Hastings, he said softly, how each suspect speaks with a truth that is half concealed. The real answers lie in those silences, and in the small details they overlook. He patted the pearl vial in his pocket. We have yet to learn its true meaning. But rest assured, the little grey cells will find their way. Outside, the keen autumn breeze rustled the hedges. I felt the first real tremor of anticipation. The gathering of suspects was complete, and with it, the first true stage of our mystery. Chapter 4. Poirot arrives dawn, broke clear and chilly over Greystone Manor, its turrets and gables gilded by the first pale rays of sunlight. I found Monsieur Poirot already in the estate's entrance hall, standing before the great oak doors with that air of imperious calm he so effortlessly commands. He surveyed the surroundings. polished stone floors, the grand staircase spiralling upward like a watchful sentinel, and the portraits of Rathbone ancestors lining the walls, each stiff in their gilded frames, as if awaiting his judgment. "Ah, Hastings!" he greeted me with warmth, though his eyes remained fixed on a painting of Lady Rathbone's great-grandfather. "The morning promises clarity. Today we see the suspects anew, in their own domain." I nodded, noting how Poirot's presence transformed the hall. Where earlier there had been anxious servants and furtive glances, now all seemed hushed, compelled by his silent authority. A footman in livery approached and withdrew a silver tray, bearing a small bell. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, "the staff awaits your instructions." Poirot accepted the tray and rang the bell once. The note echoed through the hall. Within moments Mrs. Fairchild, the housekeeper, appeared, her posture ramrod straight despite the bags under her eyes. "Madame Fairchild," Poirot began, "I shall need the drawing-room cleared of all but the suspects. We begin interviews at once. Kindly ensure that no one enters without my permission." She inclined her head crisply. "Immediately, monsieur." As she retreated, Poirot turned to me. "Notice, Hastings, the staff's deference. They sense I inspect more than just facts. I inspect character." I smiled at his confidence. "Shall we fetch the suspects?" Poirot led the way up the grand staircase to the drawing-room, its tall windows now banishing the last of the morning mist. The chairs we had arranged the previous day stood ready, but this time Poirot paused to survey each suspect's place. "Observe," he whispered, "how each chair is positioned, subtly different angles, as though each occupant favours a certain vantage." He tapped the empty armchair allocated to Sir Geoffrey. "He desires prominence." He shifted to Evangeline's settee, and she chooses the shadows. Lastly, he stood before Gerald's spindle chair. He hides near the hearth, seeking warmth or comfort. His eyes lit with satisfaction. Even seating is a revelation. As the suspects entered, Poirot raised a hand in greeting. One by one they took their seats, exchanging uneasy nods. He addressed them with quiet formality. "Mes amis, today we commence the official interviews. I wish to understand each of you in mind and motive, and to discern where truth hides beneath your words." He gestured to Inspector Japp, who stood at the back of the room, pen and pad in hand. "Inspector, you shall remain present, but I ask that you allow me my solitude with each suspect, for my methods rely upon subtlety." Japp grunted, but stepped aside. Poirot's first subject was Lady Rathbone's butler, Mr. Bennet, called in at the last minute. The butler's obsequious bow betrayed his anxiety. Poirot scrutinized the man's attire, the immaculate cuffs, the polished shoes, and a faint smudge of oil on his sleeve. "Mr. Bennet," Poirot began, "you oversee the household's comings and goings. Were you aware of any tensions among the guests last night?" Bennet swallowed. "Sir, I noticed only that Colonel Huxley and Sir Geoffrey seemed deep in private conversation after supper." His voice wavered. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Indeed? Did you note their expressions? Perhaps a raised voice?" "No, monsieur. It was hushed, but Sir Geoffrey's hand struck the table, hard." Poirot nodded, filing away the detail. "Thank you, Mr. Bennet. You may return to your duties." The butler bowed and left. Next came Mrs. Fairchild, the housekeeper. "Madam," said Poirot. "You manage the staff and know this house's every corner. Did you observe anyone near the summer-house or bridge after midnight?" She frowned, glancing at the window. "Only Mr. Halcroft, sir. He returned alone, his coat damp from the dew. He went straight to his rooms." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Damp coat, you say? Did he wipe it off?" "No, monsieur. He seemed eager to reach his bed. Merci, madame." She curtsied and departed. Poirot turned to me. "Hastings, do you smell that faint perfume? Lilac, perhaps, yet there is an undercurrent of musk. A woman's scent. We must note it. The one who left that aroma must be among our circle." I inhaled gently. Indeed, a delicate floral note lingered. "Miss Lowe?" Poirot inclined his head. "Perhaps. Let us test our hypothesis." He signalled Evangeline Lowe forward. She approached with cautious grace, settling on the settee. Poirot studied her posture, her carefully arranged hair, and the way her hands clasped her skirts. "Miss Lowe," he began softly, "you left the gardens for air. May I ask why?" She drew in a breath. "I needed space to think. The conversation during supper became heated." She glanced at Sir Geoffrey. "He questioned my writing methods." Poirot's gaze flicked to Sir Geoffrey Murray, who sat with arms folded. "And how did that make you feel, Miss Lowe?" She hesitated, colour rising in her cheeks. "Undervalued. I felt dismissed as frivolous." Poirot nodded. "Frustration can breed resentment. Yet you returned to the party without mention of a threat. Why?" She pressed her lips together. "I assumed the note was prankish until this morning." Poirot folded his hands. "Thank you, Miss Lowe. You may step aside." As she left, the lilac scent intensified momentarily, then faded. Sir Geoffrey Murray was next. He stood tall, yet his eyes betrayed impatience. "Monsieur Murray," Poirot said, "you roam in a world of plots and red herrings. Do you find life imitates art?" Sir Geoffrey smiled thinly. "On occasion, but reality, I assure you, is far more unpredictable." Poirot gave a small smile. "Indeed. Tell me of your exchange with Colonel Huxley." Sir Geoffrey's jaw tightened. It concerned Lady Rathbone's will. The Colonel suggested I might profit from certain clauses. He paused. Our conversation was firm, but civil. A flicker of surprise crossed Poirot's face. "The will. Has it been recently updated?" Gerald's sharp intake of breath told more than words. Poirot's eyes gleamed. We moved next to Colonel Huxley, whose military bearing remained impeccable. Poirot noted the crispness of his sleeve and the faint smell of gun oil on his coat. "Colonel," Poirot began, "you have known hardship. Do you believe in justice or revenge?" The Colonel studied Poirot a moment before replying. "Justice, monsieur. Revenge begets only more blood." Poirot inclined his head. "Yet, if one believes justice requires a sacrifice, one might take drastic steps." He paused. "Have you any regret, Colonel?" The Colonel's gaze hardened. "Regret is for the weak." Poirot studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Thank you." Finally, he called Gerald Halcroft. The young man approached with uncertain steps. Poirot circled him, observing the fine cut of his jacket, the tremor of his hands, and a faint line of crimson at the cuff. "Mr. Halcroft," Poirot said gently, You value this estate. Tell me, did you discuss your inheritance with your late uncle, your father?" Gerald's eyes stung with emotion. I loved my father. My uncle was kind, but I did not trust him to see me cared for." He swallowed. "When he died, I mourned deeply." Poirot's voice softened. "Mourning and gratitude can conflict. Does your aunt share this sentiment?" Gerald shook his head. "She loved him too, but she never blamed me. I am grateful." Poirot patted his shoulder. "Very well." Interviews concluded, Japp re-entered the room. Poirot rose and addressed the circle that had reassembled. "We have listened to each account. Now, I must reflect upon these testimonies. In 1 hour, I shall summon you again, together for further inquiry. Until then, I ask you to remain available and to reflect upon your own words." He inclined his head courteously, and the suspects departed like players leaving a stage. Japp approached Poirot. "Well?" he grunted. "Any progress?" Poirot steepled his fingers. "Progress, Inspector, lies in contradictions. I have observed a nervous glance, a misplaced phrase, and a red silk thread. These shall guide us. But patience, mon ami. Patience. The best clues appear when least expected." He turned to me. "Come, Hastings. Let us walk in the gardens and ponder what we have learned." We left the drawing-room in companionable silence. Outside, the sun illuminated dew-laden petals, but beneath that beauty lay tension unresolved. I felt excitement stir. Poirot's interviews had offered glimpses of truth, yet each answer spawned another question. As we strolled beneath the clipped yew hedges, Poirot's mind was already racing. I could not know which clue he would seize next, but I trusted his little grey cells implicitly. The investigation had truly begun, and the day promised revelations yet unimagined. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. That afternoon the sky brightened with soft sunlight, yet within Greystone manor the mood remained taut. Poirot arranged to question each primary suspect in private, believing that solitude encouraged candid revelations. The first interview took place in the panelled library, its shelves heavy with leather-bound volumes and the rich scent of polished oak. Sir Geoffrey Murray entered, smoothing his waistcoat, posture erect. Poirot greeted him with a slight bow and gestured to a wing-back chair beside the hearth. As the door closed, the crackle of the fire seemed to echo the unspoken tension. "Monsieur Murray," Poirot began, voice gentle, "you have crafted tales of deception and motive. Tell me, in your own novels, the murderer often plants a token at the crime scene. Why do you think a murderer would leave behind a pearl?" Sir Geoffrey paused, eyes narrowing. "A pearl as a false trail, perhaps, or to suggest a message of betrayal. Pearls are symbols of tears and regret." Poirot nodded. "Indeed. Now, you claimed your discussion with Colonel Huxley revolved around the will, yet you described the conversation as civil. Yet the scratch on the bridge plank suggests anger or haste. Did you pass that bridge alone last night after the gathering?" Sir Geoffrey's brow furrowed. "I walked back with Colonel Huxley, but when we reached the summer-house door, I lingered by the footbridge to retrieve a fallen glove." He flexed his hand. "I thought I heard a sound, perhaps a voice, but when I looked, no one was there." Poirot leaned forward, fingers steepled. "A voice? What did it say?" Sir Geoffrey shifted. It was too faint. Perhaps my imagination. He cleared his throat. I found nothing, so I returned to the summer-house and fetched my glove. Poirot's eyes glinted. And yet only one scratch marred the bridge plank. A glove might slip in haste, but would it gouge wood so cleanly? Tell me, Monsieur Murray, what is your glove made of? The novelist hesitated, then unbuttoned his coat and retrieved a kid-leather glove from his breast pocket. "Fine lambskin," he said. Poirot studied it in the lamplight. No rough edges, no unintended grit. That glove would not scratch wood, so your tale of the lost glove falters. He paused, allowing silence to press. "Thank you, Monsieur Murray. I have what I need." Sir Geoffrey rose, face pale, and bowed stiffly before departing. Moments later, Evangeline Lowe was ushered. In Poirot's chair was angled slightly toward the window, casting her silhouette against the fading light. "Miss Lowe," he began, "you mentioned distress over your brother's disappearance, a loss that shapes one's view of family. Tell me, when you left the gardens after supper, did you take this path by the river?" She nodded, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. "Yes, I sought solitude among the willows." Her gaze flicked to a book on the nearby table, an anthology of romantic poetry. Poirot smiled. A fitting companion for melancholy. Now, this morning the locket's pearl was found in the moss. Do you collect pearls for your writing research? Evangeline's cheeks coloured. I admire their metaphorical weight, but I do not own this one." He produced the small vial, placing it gently on the table. "Yet I smell upon it the faintest trace of your cologne. Lilac mixed with vanilla." She inhaled sharply. "That fragrance is mine. Yes, but I only glanced at the locket to admire its carving. I did not touch it." Poirot's eyes shone. "And yet the silk fibres on the bridge matched the hem of your gown. You wore a dress trimmed with red silk last evening, did you not?" She lowered her eyes. "A detail I had forgotten." Her voice trembled. "I walked the bridge at midnight. I was angry. Sir Geoffrey belittled my writing. I tossed my shawl aside in frustration." She bit her lip. "I did not intend to remove the pearl." Poirot nodded gravely. "Anger can blind us to our own actions, Miss Lowe. Thank you for your honesty." As she left, Poirot dabbed the vial with a tissue, preserving the scent. The door opened again to admit Colonel Huxley, whose uniform now bore a faint crease. He stepped into the room, military precision in each movement. "Colonel," Poirot said, "you spoke of justice, not revenge. Yet the blade that scored the plank indicates a small knife, one easily concealed. A military man might carry such a tool." The colonel bristled. "A blade for utility, not violence." Poirot gestured to a small table where a folding penknife lay, its handle inlaid with ivory. "A common keepsake for officers. Might this belong to you?" The colonel stiffened. "It was a gift, yes, my late comrade's, but I left it in my quarters. Tool for carving, tool for silence," Poirot murmured. "Tell me, Colonel, whose study did you enter after midnight?" Huxley's jaw tightened. "No one's. I returned to my room immediately after parting ways with Sir Geoffrey." Poirot tapped the ivory handle. "Yet no prints on this knife save mine. and yet the blade's width matches precisely the scratch on the bridge. You carry guilt lightly, Colonel. Huxley's face darkened. I did not harm anyone. Poirot inclined his head. Perhaps not, but the blade is yours. He folded his hands. Thank you for your time. The Colonel left without another word. Finally, Gerald Halcroft entered, hesitation in his step. Poirot motioned to a cushioned chair near a low writing desk. Gerald, Poirot said, using the nephew's given name to ease tension, you share this home with your aunt. You have the sole key to her jewellery box. Confidential trust can be a heavy burden. Gerald swallowed. She trusted me. Poirot leaned forward. Yet when the locket was opened, the pearl was gone. You said you did not see its removal. But someone must have removed it with knowledge of your aunt's habits. He reached into a drawer and produced Lady Rathbone's dressing key. This fits the box, yes? Gerald took the key, fitting it carefully into the lock. Yes. Yet small scratches mar its teeth, Poirot observed, as though it has been turned more times than necessary. Nervous hands, perhaps. Gerald's lips quivered. I examined the locket this morning, anxious for my aunt's sake. I may have turned the key more than once. Poirot inclined his head thoughtfully. Perhaps. And yet you claim you did not touch the pearl. And yet you have the pocket-knife that could open the setting. Gerald looked stricken. I did not use it. Poirot's gaze softened. Fear can stifle confession. We shall see. He tapped the key. Thank you, Gerald. As the young man departed, Poirot sat back, steepling his fingers. The firelight danced across his face. I returned to his side. Monsieur Poirot, we have contradictions and confessions, but no clear culprit. His eyes gleamed. Ah, but Hastings, note what is absent. No one has truly denied presence on the bridge at midnight, except Lady Rathbone herself. And yet, who among them feared her most? Who removed the pearl to provoke her, yet left it simply in moss? The motive must be deeper. Roeder rose, gathering his notes. The initial interviews reveal what lies in plain sight, but the true murderer hides in shadows. Now, Hastings, we must follow these threads. Take courage, for the tapestry grows ever more tangled. We left the library as rustling voices drifted through the corridors. The suspects had spoken, and yet concealed their darkest truths. Poirot's little grey cells were at work, dissecting each nuance. The investigation pressed on, and the path to justice remained as winding and secret as the footbridge beneath a pale moon. Chapter 6. The First False Lead. That evening, the hush of Greystone Manor deepened into solemn quiet. Candlelight flickered. In the corridors and beyond the windows, the garden hedges loomed like silent sentinels. In the great hall, Inspector Japp gathered us for an urgent announcement. Poirot and I arrived to find him standing before the assembled household staff and guests. A pair of leather gloves held aloft like damning evidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Japp began, his voice resounding off the oak panelling, "we have reason to believe the perpetrator attempted an attack tonight on Colonel Huxley." A murmur ran through the group. He held up one glove. "Found in the corridor outside the Colonel's chambers. It bears a fresh smear of blood." He turned to Huxley, who stood rigid, face pale. You've been wounded, Colonel. This glove matches the cut on your palm. Huxley glanced down at his hand, wrapped in a linen bandage. Yes, I cut myself on a broken bottle. His voice was taut. I assure you, it was an accident. Japp shook his head. This glove was worn by your assailant, unless you planted it yourself. He surveyed the guests. Yet only one person had access to the corridor at that hour, Miss Evangeline Lowe. Miss Lowe, you were seen leaving the library around 9:30. Evangeline's cheeks flushed crimson. She took a trembling step forward. I went to fetch a book for Lady Rathbone. I had no idea the corridor would be blocked. She glanced at Japp. I did not harm the Colonel. Perhaps not intentionally, Japp retorted, but the wound on his hand was caused by this glove when the owner slapped him. He pointed to the glove. The lining bears the same lilac perfume you wear, Miss Lowe. A sharp intake of breath echoed through the hall. Evangeline's eyes filled with tears. Poirot stepped quietly beside her and placed a calming hand on her shoulder. Inspector Japp, if you will allow me a moment. His voice was placid, yet carried the weight of unspoken authority. Let us not be hasty. Miss Lowe, did you leave any footprints in the corridor that might exonerate you or implicate another? Japp frowned. Footprints. We found only your slipper's prints leading to the Colonel's door, then none after. You returned to your room immediately afterward. Poirot nodded. Precisely. But the corridor between the library and Colonel Huxley's room branches at a service stairwell. Please direct your constable to examine that stairwell. He turned to the nearest constable. Sergeant Barnes, if you please. Moments later, Sergeant Barnes re-entered, wiping his brow. Monsieur Poirot, I found a single boot print on the 5th step of the service stair. It's the Colonel's boot pattern. Japp's face went ashen. You mean Colonel Huxley himself? Poirot inclined his head. It appears so. The print leads down the stairs, not toward Lady Rathbone's rooms. You see, Inspector, Miss Lowe walked to fetch a book only as far as the landing. Before remembering she had left her scarf in the library, she turned back, leaving no further trace. Meanwhile, Colonel Huxley ascended those stairs earlier to retrieve his penknife from the service corridor. Poirot lifted the ivory-handled knife that Huxley had surrendered. He then returned down to the corridor between his chambers and the library, where, by his own account, he accidentally cut his hand on a bottle. Huxley's broad chest heaved. Monsieur Poirot, I would never. You cannot believe I intended harm. Poirot's gaze was unflinching. Intent is often cloaked in confusion, Colonel. Yet the evidence, the boot print, the knife, the blood-stained glove, all point to you. He stepped back. Inspector, I believe our culprit believed himself safe behind a false narrative. But does that mean we arrest him? Or should we investigate further? Japp, expression conflicted, snapped his notebook shut. Arrest him, Poirot. The evidence is there. Gerald Halcroft, who had watched silently, gasped. Colonel Huxley! But why? What motive could you have? The Colonel's shoulders sagged, his anger melting into despair. I found his glove in the corridor and I thought someone was targeting me. He pointed to the knife. I carried this for protection, and the glove, when I tried to push someone away, caught my hand. He closed his eyes. It was self-defense. Evangeline shook her head, tears spilling. "But why the stairwell? That makes no sense." Poirot raised a gloved finger. "Let us not forget the initial threat. A killer walks among you, and he shall be revealed by his own hands." The Colonel's reaction has revealed him indeed, though perhaps not as the killer you suppose. He turned to Japp. "Think, Inspector. Why would the true culprit frame Colonel Huxley? And why allow this glove to be found in the corridor?" Japp scowled. "To divert suspicion. But why risk a second crime?" Poirot's eyes glittered. "To reinforce the illusion. The murderer needed to bolster the case against a scapegoat. A single anomaly would be dismissed, but a second attack cements belief. It is classic misdirection." As Japp processed Poirot's words, the Colonel sank into a nearby armchair, head bowed. Poirot placed a hand on his shoulder. "Colonel, I shall return your knife. Pray, keep calm. You will not be taken into custody this evening." The Colonel looked up, relief and confusion mingling on his face. "Merci, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot addressed the assembled guests. "Mes amis, we have witnessed a clever trick, an attempt to close this case prematurely. But I warned yesterday, appearances deceive. Our task remains to uncover the truth." He turned to me. "Hastings, let us examine the stairwell more thoroughly and revisit the garden paths. The true culprit's next move lies hidden in plain sight." As we departed, Japp hesitated, glancing from Poirot to Huxley. "I suppose more investigation is needed." Poirot offered a small smile. "More investigation, yes, and less haste, for justice demands patience." Outside the moon had risen, and now cast prismatic light across the dewy grounds. As we crossed toward the service stairwell, I sensed the first false lead had been laid bare, and with it, the real game began. Chapter 7. The Psychological Gamelate. That evening, the drawing-room's lamps cast long shadows upon the Persian rugs, and the fire crackled low in the hearth, lending its warmth to the tense gathering. Poirot had summoned all present: Lady Rathbone, Sir Geoffrey Murray, Evangeline Lowe, Colonel Huxley, and Gerald Halcroft, to witness a demonstration of sorts. Not a reconstruction of events, but a test of nerves and motives. Inspector Japp stood by the door, notebook in hand, while Dr. Franklin observed from a high-backed chair near the window. Poirot took his place at the head of the semicircle, his back straight, fingers steepled. On the small table before him rested the ivory-handled penknife, the crimson-stained glove, and the glass vial holding the pearl. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice soft yet commanding, "we have seen how appearances can mislead. Tonight I propose a little experiment, an exercise in psychology." He allowed a moment's pause, letting his eyes travel across each face. "I shall present you with truths, half-truths, and omissions. Your reactions will reveal more than your words ever could." He lifted the glove. This glove was meant to frame Colonel Huxley. Yet, as I showed earlier, the evidence points to him not out of guilt, but through clever misdirection. He set the glove down and picked up the penknife. "And this knife bears the maker's mark of every military officer here. But possession does not equate to malice." He laid the knife beside the glove. "Now," Poirot continued, "consider the pearl." He held the vial aloft. "A pearl is formed by irritation within the oyster. A small grain of sand causes layers to build, beautiful but born of pain. So too, our mystery is built upon irritations, small slights, resentments, the friction of hidden desires. He replaced the pearl and turned to Sir Geoffrey. Monsieur Murray, you spoke yesterday of clauses in the will. You seemed intrigued by them. Tell me, do you delight in the suffering of others as your stories delight readers? Sir Geoffrey's lips tightened. He drew a steadying breath. I write of human nature, Monsieur Poirot, not necessarily from experience. Poirot inclined his head. Of course. Yet when you learned of Lady Rathbone's generous bequests to Gerald, your expression changed. Was it curiosity, envy, or something else? He watched Sir Geoffrey's eyes flicker. Sir Geoffrey swallowed. It was surprise. I had not expected such a large share for Gerald. And yet, Poirot pressed, your surprise turned to disappointment. You faltered when describing your evening's walk and the discovery of your glove, almost as though you rehearsed the story. He smiled faintly. Human beings are poor actors when the stakes are personal. Sir Geoffrey bristled, then relaxed, with an impatient shrug. I have rehearsed nothing. If you doubt me, you may search my rooms again. Poirot's eyes danced. Perhaps. Or perhaps it is enough simply to note your discomfort. He turned to Evangeline. Miss Lowe, you have known loss greater than most. When I mentioned the oyster's irritation, did you not recall your brothers and disappearance, the grain of sand in your life? Her eyes glistened. Evangeline swallowed. My brother was lost to me long ago. I have learned to live with that pain. Poirot nodded. Pain shapes perception. Some seek to soothe it, others to exacerbate it in others. He studied her closely. You confessed earlier to anger at Sir Geoffrey's critique, yet you denied touching the pearl knowingly. And still, your scarf was found near the railing. He held his gaze. Why provoke your hostess thus? She bit her lip. I wanted to test my strength, to see if I could withstand insult. But I did not mean to cause turmoil. Innocent or not, you left your threads behind. He tapped the vial. The pearl and the silk speak a language of their own. He turned to Gerald. Gerald, you stood aside during these exchanges, silent but attentive. You care for your aunt, yet I sense fear of something unspoken. Gerald's shoulders twitched. Gerald looked down. I fear dishonouring her trust. Poirot's voice softened. Trust is a fragile thing like a shell. Once cracked, protection is lost. He paused, letting the metaphor settle. You possess the key to Lady Rathbone's jewellery box, yet you claim to know nothing of the pearl's removal. How does one lose what one has never handled? Gerald's breath caught. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unready to speak. Poirot moved on to Lady Rathbone herself. Madame, you have been gracious to invite us into your home, yet you are vulnerable. Your legacy, your memory, your very reputation at stake. When you saw the morsel of evidence, your locket desecrated, what was your first thought? Rathbone's hands trembled slightly. She drew her shawl tighter. I thought only of my husband's memory and the cruelty of fate. Poirot inclined his head sympathetically. Cruelty of fate or cruelty of the living? Sometimes, madam, the greatest predators are those we least suspect. He offered a gentle smile. Forgive my frankness." Lady Rathbone nodded, then stood, placing a hand over her heart. Poirot paused, then clapped his hands softly. "Thank you, mes amis. You have all spoken truly, yet withheld more. We shall allow these revelations to settle, for tomorrow we return to the scene of the crime. Tonight, rest, but remain vigilant, for in your dreams doubt may speak more clearly than words by day." As the guests dispersed in silence, Sir Geoffrey lingered by the window. Evangeline's shoulders shook with silent tears. Gerald's gaze remained fixed on the portrait of his late father, and Lady Rathbone retreated behind, a screen composing herself. Colonel Huxley, though acquitted, paced the corridor outside, muttering to himself. Poirot watched them go, then turned to Japp. "Mon ami, the psychological game is set. Already I have seen fear, envy, grief, and guilt. Each suspect bears their torment like a badge. It is in those torments that the truth hides." He placed a gloved hand on Japp's arm. "Rest now, and prepare. Tomorrow we scrutinize every step on that bridge once more." Japp nodded, uncertain but willing to follow Poirot's lead. As the inspector departed, Poirot looked after the retreating figures, his little grey cells working late into the night. Outside, the moon shone down upon the silent footbridge, its boards awaiting the next act in this drama of deception and revelation. Chapter 8. A Secondary Mystery. The next morning, a sharp chill lay in the air, and a thin frost coated the sprawling lawns of Greystone Manor. Poirot and I arrived at the footbridge well before dawn, determined to re-examine the scene under new eyes. Yet before we could begin, Sergeant Barnes intercepted us with urgent news. "Monsieur Poirot, Monsieur Hastings, there has been an incident in the library." Barnes panted, breath steaming. "Lady Rathbone's private papers have vanished." Poirot's eyebrows shot upward. "Vanished? Which papers?" "The codicil to her will," Barnes replied, "and several letters bound with a crimson ribbon." My heart sank. The codicil had been crucial, establishing the final distribution of the estate. Now it had disappeared, and with it, perhaps the key to a motive more intimate than any we had yet uncovered. Poirot pressed a gloved finger to his lips. "Lead the way, Sergeant." We hurried back to the manor, where the library door stood ajar. Inside, Mrs. Fairchild hovered near the writing desk, her hands clasped in distress. The desk drawer lay open, its contents scattered. A scattering of blank parchment, but the cream-coloured folio and the crimson-bound letters were gone. Lady Rathbone stood just beyond, pale as a spectre. "My codicil! It was here, Monsieur Poirot. I placed it under my favourite inkwell for safekeeping." Poirot knelt, examining the floor around the desk. "Note, Hastings, the absence of footprints near the chair. Whoever took these papers did so swiftly, without pausing or leaving a trace." His gaze fell upon the hearth. The ashes had been disturbed, and amid the grey grit lay a single envelope, back slit open. He retrieved it and slipped out the letter within. A note. He smoothed the freshly torn edge. The handwriting was the same delicate script as the first threat. "The game changes. Trust no one." A murmur rose among the household. Lady Rathbone's hand flew to her throat. "Another note! But what does it mean?" Poirot folded the letter carefully. "It seems our murderer grows bold. The first threat warned of bloodshed. This warns of betrayal. He held the envelope aloft. And this envelope was in your hearth, madam. It was burned, then retrieved. He tapped the charred edge. A signal. A clue that our culprit has access to this room and knows our movements. Inspector Japp frowned. But who would risk entering the library when all are accounted for under tight watch? Poirot's moustache twitched. An audacious soul, or one desperate to remain hidden. Now, Hastings, let us inspect the paper's previous location. He moved to the writing desk and lifted the inkwell, revealing a narrow slit carved in two, the wood's underside large enough to slide the rolled codicil through. Here, Hastings, a secret compartment. The inkwell was merely a cover. Some who knew of this hiding place took advantage. He tapped the desk's edge. Only someone intimate with this room, or observant of another, would know, Fairchild gasped. But only my aunt and I ever work here. And yet someone has entered, Poirot replied. Let us note the floor tiles beneath the desk. 3 faint impressions, one booted, one slippered, and one— He knelt, eyes narrowing, bare. He rose, eyes on Lady Rathbone. Madame, did you ever leave these papers in your pocket when retiring? Lady Rathbone hesitated, then shook her head. Never. I protected them here deliberately. Poirot turned to the assembled. We must conclude that one among this circle has intimate knowledge of Lady Rathbone's habits, or has observed them closely. He studied Sir Geoffrey Murray, who looked pallid and flustered, Evangeline Lowe, whose lip trembled, Colonel Huxley, rigid as ever, and Gerald Halcroft, whose eyes flicked guiltily to the hearth. He stowed the letter and envelope in his evidence bag. This secondary mystery is not mere misdirection. It is a confession of intent. The murderer seeks leverage. The codicil's disappearance gives power over Lady Rathbone's legacy. Inspector Japp ran a hand through his hair. So what, now? We cannot search every room every minute. Poirot's eyes shone with resolve. We divide and observe. Each suspect will be assigned a partner, 1 staff member and 1 guest. You, Japp, take Sir Geoffrey and Mrs. Fairchild to inspect his quarters. I shall accompany Colonel Huxley and Mr. Bennet to his rooms. Hastings, you oversee Miss Lowe and Mr. Holcroft as they search the secondary study. I nodded, though my mind raced. The study, a smaller room off the gallery, contained more of Lady Rathbone's personal effects, but if the papers were hidden there, they must be well concealed. Moments later, our search parties dispersed. Poirot and Huxley entered the Colonel's suite, a compact space lined with memorabilia of campaigns past. Poirot's eyes lifted to a framed dispatch proclaiming Huxley's valour. He then turned to the bookshelf. Look for a hollow, perhaps, behind a run of identical volumes. He tapped each spine methodically. Huxley watched nervously, shifting on his feet. Mrs. Fairchild's searching glance fell upon the desk drawer, but found nothing. Meanwhile, in the gallery, I directed Evangeline and Gerald to open every drawer, lift every cushion, and inspect, each carving on the wooden panels. Evangeline's movements were precise, Gerald's hesitant yet thorough. Back in the Colonel's rooms, Poirot had discovered a false back in a cabinet. He withdrew a slender box powdered with dust. He opened it to reveal the missing codicil, carefully rolled and tied with crimson ribbon. And a second note. Trust no one. Colonel Huxley's hand flew to his mouth. I did not hide these. I found them here when retrieving my cleaning cloth. His eyes met Poirot's. I swear, I panicked and left them there so they could be found later. I thought, no, I don't know. Poirot extended the codicil to the Colonel. You were right to hide them from prying eyes, but wrong to hide them in your own apartment. He pocketed the additional note. This reveals our culprit's signature, yet we still lack the author. He studied Huxley. Thank you, Colonel. That will be all. In the gallery, Evangeline held up the crimson ribbon. Her brow furrowed. Gerald uncovered an empty inkwell hidden behind a panel, but no papers. Suddenly, Evangeline gasped, pointing to a shelf. Here, these books turn as a lever. She pressed one tome, and a concealed compartment opened, yet it, too, was empty. Contemplated the empty shelf. The culprit likely led us here by planting the ribbon, but removed everything before we arrived. I picked up a scrap of frenetic handwriting, part of a torn letter. I handed it to Gerald. Study this. There may be another clue. We regrouped in the hall. Poirot eyed the ribbon and scrap paper. Our thief is skilled in concealment and quick, yet they left traces. A paper scrap, a signature note, a secret cabinet. He turned to Japp. Inspector, we have narrowed the search. It is time to confront our suspects one by one, under the guise of recovery, but truly to observe their reactions. Japp nodded. I'll gather them. As the four of us prepared to summon the suspect circle, I felt the stakes escalate. The disappearance of the codicil was more than misdirection. It was a declaration, and Poirot, with his little grey cells of fire, was poised to ignite the next revelation. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The drawing-room was hushed when we assembled again. Lady Rathbone seated at the piano, Sir Geoffrey Murray near the fireplace, Evangeline Low on the settee, Colonel Huxley standing by the bookcase, and Gerald Halcroft beside the window. Poirot stood before them, the codicil in one hand and the crimson ribbon in the other. Mes amis, he began, we have recovered the codicil, and yet our mystery deepens. What remains hidden is often more telling than what lies before us. Tonight, I propose to reveal connections previously obscured. He laid the codicil on the table and unrolled it face up, then held the ribbon so that each guest could see its vibrant hue. Observe, this ribbon matches the binding on several personal letters discovered in Lady Rathbone's writing desk. Letters written not to her, but by her. Letters addressed to S. He looked meaningfully at Gerald, whose colour rose. Our scrap of torn paper bore the phrase, "Meet me under the chestnut tree, S." He paused, letting the silence linger. Lady Rathbone gave a startled gasp. I never meant that those letters be known. Her voice shook. They were correspondence with my late husband's brother, my brother-in-law, Sergeant Simons of the Yard. We were closer than propriety allowed. Poirot nodded. Hidden relationships often cast unexpected shadows. Yet Sergeant Simons passed away years ago, and this codicil ensuring generosity to Gerald was unknown to him. He traced a finger along the codicil's margin. Who then would benefit if knowledge of these letters, or of that codicil, were to surface? Sir Geoffrey cleared his throat. Madame, your affection for a late brother-in-law hardly interests me. Poirot's eyes flicked to him. Yet you and Sergeant Simons once shared literary conversations. Your first novel was dedicated to him, was it not? Sir Geoffrey stiffened. That was professional courtesy. Evangeline leaned forward. But do you deny resentment, Sir Geoffrey? You lost a friend and a confidant in Sergeant Simons, while I lost my brother. Another disappearance with no closure. Poirot gave her a sympathetic nod. Miss Lowe, your grief binds you to Lady Rathbone through shared loss, yet you two never spoke of it. He looked at the hostess. Why not? Lady Rathbone's eyes glistened. Because each night in those letters he reminded me of my duties, to family, to the estate. I could not bear to burden Miss Lowe with my regrets. Regrets, Poirot echoed. Regrets can twist into guilt, and guilt into vengeance. He rose and placed the ribbon atop the codicil. But there is more. He moved to the piano and lifted its fullboard, revealing beneath a stack of music sheets a leather-bound journal. This belonged to Colonel Huxley. Huxley's face grew pale. My journal! I thought it lost. Poirot opened it and read aloud a passage dated last month. Met with Lady Rathbone this afternoon. She insisted upon confidentiality regarding Gerald's inheritance. I find her distrustful. If his claim grows public, I lose an ally in securing my family's debts. Gerald's brow furrowed. Family's debts? Huxley turned stiffly. My resources in India are gone. I hoped to procure a loan from Lady Rathbone, but she refused. Poirot closed the journal. Hidden financial stakes, Colonel. You stood to gain, yet you felt spurned. He faced Gerald. And you, Monsieur Halcroft, did you suspect the Colonel's motive? Gerald swallowed. I admired him as a war hero, but I sensed he withheld the truth. Poirot nodded. And yet you did not mention this when questioned. He stepped between them. Here, all are entangled. Lady Rathbone and Sergeant Simons by affection. Miss Lowe and her vanished brother by shared pain. Sir Geoffrey and Simons by literary camaraderie. Colonel Huxley and Lady Rathbone by financial expectation. And Gerald caught between loyalty to his aunt and wariness of her guests. He turned to Evangeline. Miss Lowe, your poems once described pearls as tears of the heart. You asked Lady Rathbone for access to her locket so you could study its imagery. Evangeline lowered her gaze. Yes, I admired it. And yet, Poirot continued, you cut your scarf in haste, leaving fibres on the bridge. You handled the locket where no one dared approach. He fixed his gaze. Does your admiration justify reckless curiosity? Evangeline's voice was barely audible. I only wish to capture its metaphor. Poirot inclined his head. A noble impulse, yet one that places you near our mystery's heart. He moved to Sir Geoffrey. Monsieur, last night you borrowed a pen from the butler, claimed to correct a passage in your manuscript. Yet the ink on your cuff matched the colour of the codicil's script. Sir Geoffrey's lips pressed thin. I did correct a letter for Dr. Franklin. Dr. Franklin stepped forward. Indeed, I asked Sir Geoffrey to help, but the ink was dark blue, not black as in the codicil. Poirot smiled. Another hidden flaw. He turned to Gerald. And you, Gerald, left your note of thanks in the Colonel's book as a gesture of camaraderie, and that note vanished from here before the codicil's theft. Gerald shook his head, perplexed. See how each of you is connected, yet each connection obscures as much as it reveals, Poirot said. Our culprit has exploited these bonds. They manipulated trust, creating false paths. The pearl, the glove, the coded letters, the journal's passages. He folded his hands. But one more connection remains hidden, and that is the one that chooses the next victim. He looked at Lady Rathbone. Madame, did you ever suspect anyone close enough to have a key to this very drawing-room? Lady Rathbone's face trembled. Only my staff and my nephew, but they have alibis. Poirot's eyes glimmered. Alibis, yes, but memory can be volatile. I ask each of you, recall every moment you spent in this room from dusk until dawn. The truth hides in the intervals between your recollections. He stepped back. Tonight, we rest upon our hidden connections. Tomorrow, we shall weave these threads into a tapestry of clarity. But beware, the murderer remains among you, watching closely, waiting to strike again. A sudden gust rattled. The windows and the candles flickered. The circle held its breath, each suspect lost in thought. Outside, the moon paused above the silent footbridge as if listening, and I knew that Poirot, with his little grey cells, was poised on the brink of a revelation that would shatter every hidden bond. Chapter 10. Poirot's Secret Clue. By the following morning, a brittle frost still lingered in shaded corners of Greystone, Manners Gardens, but within the house the air hummed with anticipation. Poirot had summoned us once more to the drawing-room, summons delivered with his customary precision. Each suspect to arrive at exactly 8:17 a.m. sharp. As we assembled, I noted the tension in every posture, every hand tightening and loosening, in silent rehearsal of self-possession. Poirot stood before the mantel itself freshly cleared of all but a single-framed family portrait. Lady Rathbone with her late husband, their faces alight with youth. He held in one hand the ivory-handled penknife, and in the other the crimson ribbon from the codicil's binding. On the low table lay the locket's box, the empty setting glaring like an open wound. "Mes amis," Poirot began, voice soft yet unwavering, "you have endured much in these past days. Threats, misdirection, and the theft of precious papers. Today, I present to you the secret clue, small, almost invisible, which changes everything." He placed the knife and ribbon aside, then slid the portrait from its frame. In the gasp that followed, pale wallpaper was revealed beneath. Faint rectangular discolorations where the frame's corners had shielded the paper from sunlight. "Observe here," Poirot said, tapping his finger on one corner of the antique, gilt frame. "These impressions indicate two things. First, that this frame has been moved recently. Second, that it concealed something behind it." He gestured to Lady Rathbone. "Madame, did you ever keep any documents behind this portrait?" Lady Rathbone's face paled. "No, I cannot say that I did." Poirot drew a small magnifying glass from his waistcoat and examined the wallpaper's surface. "Yet the dust, pattern behind the frame is irregular. Someone reached behind it and removed an object, one that fit this exact space." He held up a slender scrap of leather, a fragment of glove. Gasps echoed around the room. Japp's eyebrows shot upward. Colonel Huxley shifted as though stung. Poirot continued. "This fragment matches those found earlier beneath the bridge, the brown brigade gloves. And yet, none of you have confessed to entering this room late at night to remove any object. He paused, letting the weight of the statement settle. He unfolded the portrait backing, an inner board, and held aloft a small piece of parchment, folded into a square. Here lies the missing page from Lady Rathbone's journal. The page dated 2 nights before the codicil's theft. It reads, "Tonight I shall confront S and demand the truth. No more secrets shall stand between us." Poirot's eyes swept the circle. S, of course, being the initial of one of you. Gerald's hand flew to his mouth. Evangeline's gaze dropped. Sir Geoffrey opened his mouth, then closed it again. Colonel Huxley's jaw clenched. Poirot placed the journal, page on the table next to the codicil. This page held the motive in plain sight. Lady Rathbone intended to expose her correspondent, S, and perhaps revoke provisions in the will. The murderer feared discovery and struck first. He turned to Lady Rathbone. "Madame, did you indeed plan to meet S here?" Lady Rathbone shivered and nodded. "Yes, he promised to come at midnight." Her voice trembled. "I did not know he would steal the codicil." Poirot's moustache twitched. He had opportunity. Access to this room, knowledge of the secret cavity, and tools to remove and replace the portrait. But he overlooked one detail. He retrieved the ribbon and knife. He removed his gloves to handle the parchment, hence the fragment behind the frame. But when replacing the portrait, he reinserted the glove fragment along the edge, thinking no one would notice. He tapped the fragment, a slip in haste, proof that the culprit entered here twice. Once to glimpse the secret compartment beneath the desk for the codicil, again to retrieve the journal page as insurance. Poirot turned to Sir Geoffrey. "Monsieur Murray, you possess both the intellect to deduce secret compartments and the familiarity with this house through Lady Rathbone's social calls. Yet you denied ever entering this room after dinner." Sir Geoffrey's face drained of colour. I did go here, but only because I heard a noise, a soft thump." He swallowed. "I peeked behind the portrait, saw the parchment, and panicked. I took only the page, intending to return it, until the codicil vanished." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And the pearl, the glove by the bridge, the misdirection with the second attack, all orchestrated to frame Colonel Huxley and Evangeline, to divert suspicion from yourself." Sir Geoffrey sank into a chair. "I never meant to kill anyone. I only wanted to protect Madame's secret. When the codicil was missing, I feared she would accuse me, ruin my reputation." His voice cracked. "I staged the theft as misdirection." Poirot inclined his head. "But theft without the actual codicil. You expected that someone else would find it, deliver a confession, or that you could restore the document unobserved." Hidou turned to Japp. "Inspector, we have our secret clue, the glove fragment behind the frame. It alone unravels the entire scheme." Japp stepped forward, pulling Sir Geoffrey to his feet. "You're under arrest for theft, conspiracy, and, if any life was endangered, attempted murder." Sir Geoffrey, eyes bleak, offered no resistance. Poirot placed a comforting hand on Lady Rathbone's arm. "I am sorry, madam," he said gently. "Your trust was betrayed by one you welcomed into your confidence." Lady Rathbone wept softly. Evangeline and Gerald exchanged relieved glances. Colonel Huxley exhaled, as though waking from a nightmare. Poirot surveyed the assembled group. Let this be a lesson. Small details, Dust patterns, fragments, footprints are the true language of crime. We must listen always to what they whisper. As the constables led Sir Geoffrey away, Poirot turned to me. Hastings, our secret clue has done its work. But remember, secrets may lie exposed, yet they often leave wounds that time alone can heal. I nodded, awed by Poirot's diligence. Outside, the frost had melted under a rising sun, and the footbridge stood empty, its boards once again silent, yet forever witness to the intricate game of mind and motive that had passed across them. Chapter 11. Tensions rise. The hall outside the drawing-room crackled with tension as the news of Sir Geoffrey Murray's arrest spread like wildfire. Word had been discreetly passed. He was to be held in the East Wing until the Yard's carriage arrived. Yet for those remaining, Lady Rathbone, Evangeline Lowe, Colonel Huxley, Gerald Halcroft, Inspector Japp, Dr. Franklin, and Monsieur Poirot himself, there remained much to unravel, and the air felt taut as though primed for a thunderclap. Poirot had requested that we reconvene in the morning room, a smaller, more intimate chamber lined with plush chairs and heavy draperies. There he stood before a low round table strewn with evidence. The codicil securely returned to its ivory box, the crimson ribbon, the ivory-handled penknife, and the fragment of glove. But his attention was fixed on the faces gathered around. "Him, mes amis," he began, his voice measured. "We have unmasked one player in our drama, but the game is not yet complete. The arrest of Sir Geoffrey shows that opportunities were seized, but motives remain entangled." He surveyed Lady Rathbone. "Madam, may I ask how you feel now that the man you trusted most has been revealed as a betrayer?" Lady Rathbone's fingers trembled against the tablecloth. I am grateful for your diligence, Monsieur Poirot, but my heart aches for the breach of trust. Yet I know there is still more to learn. Sir Geoffrey acted out of misplaced loyalty to me, but there was still the threat of violence to another. Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, we must now consider alliances and resentments among those yet at liberty." He turned to Colonel Huxley. "Colonel, when you believed yourself under threat, you partnered with no one, yet you accused Miss Lowe of the second attack. Do you still believe she might have intended harm?" The Colonel's broad shoulders tensed. "I believed what the evidence suggested. But now I see that Miss Lowe's actions were misguided, not malicious." Evangeline lifted her chin. "Misguided? You accused me in front of everyone, Colonel. You believed I would harm you." "Only because they framed you so convincingly," Huxley replied, voice edged. Gerald Halcroft stood and interposed himself between them. "We must not turn on one another. We are all victims here." His voice quavered. "Sir Geoffrey's treachery shows that friendship can mask betrayal. Yet we must unite to find the true killer before any life is lost." Dr. Franklin frowned. "We should consider whether the culprit still moves among us, planning another misdirection, or a more deadly act." Poirot lifted a gloved hand, and the room fell silent. Exactly so. The true murderer thrives on discord. By sowing mistrust, he or she weakens our defences. I must ask each of you, where were you between 8 last evening and midnight? He fixed his gaze on Lady Rathbone first. She drew a shuddering breath. I retired to my chambers at 8:30, practiced my scales on the piano for a while, then wrote letters until nearly 11. After that, I went to bed. Letters? Poirot's interest was piqued. What letters, madam? Lady Rathbone hesitated. Thank you notes to friends who sent condolences on my husband's passing anniversary. Poirot nodded. Very well. He turned to Evangeline. Miss Lowe? Evangeline smoothed her skirt. I worked on my manuscript in the library until 9. Then I walked briefly in the garden for fresh air. She glanced at a window. I stayed by the magnolia trees until 10, then returned to the drawing-room to read by the fire until midnight. Colonel Huxley's eyes narrowed. Miss Lowe was alone in the garden, you say? Did you pass the footbridge? She nodded. I wandered by it, but did not cross. It was too frosty and dark. Poirot made a note. Thank you, Colonel. Huxley rubbed his bandaged hand. I spent the evening in my rooms, writing letters to my sister. I left only once, around 10, to fetch brandy from the pantry. No one saw me. Gerald drew in a breath as Poirot turned to him. Monsieur Halcroft? Gerald's, shoulders hunched. I assisted Dr. Franklin with the morning's initial autopsy notes, he said, voice low. But last night I was in the secondary study, reviewing family ledgers until 11, then retired to read by Lady Rathbone's portrait. Poirot's eyes glowed with interest. By the portrait of your late father? Gerald nodded. His image comforts me. Poirot folded his hands. We have accounts, but they rest on trust in your own words. Now consider the second theft of midnight, the codicil, and the 2-night-old page from Madame's journal. Both required knowledge of hidden spaces, the inkwell compartment, and the portrait backing. Which among you knew these secrets? Evangeline frowned. Only Lady Rathbone's inner circle, her nephew, her butler, and her housekeeper. Precisely, Poirot agreed. Yet the butler and housekeeper were accounted for by Mrs. Fairchild's testimony, and the clock struck midnight in their quarters. That leaves only the nephew and one other. He studied Gerald. Gerald, your presence in this room last night is not in question, but you did not mention rifling behind the portrait. Gerald's face reddened. I see it now. I did perchance glance, but I found nothing. Poirot pressed. You glanced and withdrew, but the glove fragment behind the frame was not yours. Whose glove remains unaccounted for? A hush fell as each mind turned inward. Colonel Huxley's gaze flicked to Evangeline. She flinched. Lady Rathbone's lips parted. She looked to Gerald, then to Japp. Finally, Evangeline spoke. It was provocative, dusting behind the portrait, but that glove fragment must belong to the true culprit. Japp cleared his throat. We should match the fragment to every glove in the house. Poirot shook his head. Not necessary. My secret clue has already pointed us true. The fragment was from the glove used at the bridge, from the penknife owner at the plank, and from the drawer rifler. That glove belonged to one person, the one who stood too close to the portrait before and after the theft. He turned to Colonel Huxley. Your penknife carved the plank, but you returned the glove fragment. The Colonel's eyes widened. You thought it would blend with the dust behind the portrait. Huxley's voice shook. No, I found the fragment by accident when handling the frame. I was retrieving brandy, stumbled and disturbed the glove. I did not know to leave. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Yet when you left the pantry, you passed through the garden, across the bridge, and returned here. 3 visits, each leaving its trace. Huxley's shoulders sagged. I collected brandy to steady my nerves. I had heard rumours of the codicil's theft and feared for my debts. I thought to confront— He broke off, as his voice caught in his throat. Gerald put a hand on his sleeve. "Colonel, you acted out of fear." Poirot nodded. "Exactly. Fear can drive one to desperate acts, and yet you did not steal the codicil. You only retrieved the dropped glove fragment, hoping to hide your mistake." He turned to Lady Rathbone. "No one else knew of these secret compartments save you and the true culprit. That leaves—" He paused dramatically. Miss Lowe, a collective gasp filled the room. Evangeline's eyes brimmed with tears. "Miss Lowe," Poirot continued gently, "you claimed you wished to study the locket's imagery. To do so, you needed access to the locket and to the codicil, proof of the promise your aunt made. You entered both the library and this room under cover of night, retrieved the codicil to prove a metaphor in your poetry, then left it behind. The bridge as a symbol of tears, pearls, before replacing it here." Evangeline's lips trembled. "No, I only wanted to capture its sorrow. I never meant to steal letters, only to borrow them for my writing." Poirot's eyes softened. "Yet you also retrieved that journal page, proof that your aunt planned to confront the late Sergeant Simons's confidant. You feared that revelation would ruin you as well, that she would revoke your access to the estate forever." She sank into a chair, tears spilling. "I loved this place. This house felt like home. I lost my brother and found solace here. I thought if I could show her the power of metaphor, if I could capture her grief in verse, she would forgive my intrusion. I did not foresee how dangerous it could be." Inspector Japp stepped forward. "Miss Lowe, I must take you in for theft of the codicil and related conspiracies." Evangeline closed her eyes, shoulders shaking. "I am sorry. So sorry." Poirot addressed the circle. "Let this be the final blow of tension. The murderous games of fear and misdirection were bound by emotion. Fear of loss, envy, desperation. We have seen how quickly trust can shatter." He turned to me. "Hastings, bring Evangeline her shawl." As I did so, he laid a hand on her shoulder. "Miss Lowe, your poetry gave voice to sorrow, but poetry cannot absolve actions. You will face justice, but also a chance for redemption." Outside, frost glistened like tears on the hedge, and the footbridge where so much fear had played out lay silent once more. Within Greystone Manor, however, the tensions had peaked, and would not subside until truth and justice had their final say. Chapter 12. The confrontation. Late that afternoon, after a sparse luncheon hastily eaten, Poirot requested the presence of Miss Evangeline Lowe in the library. The others dispersed to their respective quarters under the pretence of rest, though I suspected each remained on edge, awaiting the next turn in Poirot's inexorable design. I accompanied Evangeline down the long corridor, where the light from high windows cast elongated rectangles upon the carpet, like the opening of a courtroom. "Miss Lowe," Poirot greeted her from behind the library desk, upon which lay the recovered codicil, the ivory-handled knife, and the crimson ribbon. He offered her a chair, and waited until she was seated, her fingers trembling as they intertwined. There was no malice in his posture, only infinitely patient attention. "Miss Lowe," he began softly, "you have confessed to the theft of the codicil and the concealed journal page. Yet there remains one question unanswered. The identity of the individual you believed would judge your poetry by the light of these documents." He leaned forward. "To whom does the initial S refer?" Evangeline's lips parted, then closed again. Her eyes, glassy with tears, flitted to the codicil. I thought S stood for Simons, my brother." Her voice caught on the name. He was gone without a trace. How I longed to speak to him again. Poirot steepled his fingers. "Ah, but you saw your aunt's letters signed to her brother-in-law, Sergeant Simons. You assumed that the threat 'Beware S' pointed to him, though he lay in his grave." He let the silence deepen before pressing on. "But the first note was written before you ever saw those letters. Someone else signed with S." Evangeline shook her head. "No, it could only be Simons." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Then tell me, who inherited the title of sergeant in this household after his death?" Her brow furrowed. "No one." Yet Mr. Bennet, the butler, served in His Majesty's forces, a sergeant by rank, before turning to domestic employment. He retains a fondness for that title." Poirot tapped the desk. "He signed the first note a friend, but the warning 'Beware S' refers to Sergeant Bennet." Evangeline's hands flew to her mouth. "My God!" Poirot continued, gently. "You believed you were mimicking poetic analogy when you left the pearl upon the bridge, tears in stone. Yet the true culprit chose that location for an entirely different reason. The sergeant's old patrol route at night. He knew the footbridge well." He paused. "Miss Lowe, you stole to capture sorrow in verse. The sergeant stole to hide a darker crime." Evangeline's tears flowed freely. "But no, he was kind to me. I do not doubt his kindness," Poirot replied. "Yet kindness can cloak culpability. Let us consider the knife scratch on the plank. You handled the knife once, but the sergeant handled it several times, practicing the stroke until the wood split. He wished not only to conceal the pearl, but to stage a confrontation at sunrise, when you, recrossing the bridge to return the locket, would become his unwitting ally." Evangeline gasped. He planned a murder?" Poirot inclined his head gravely. "He intended to kill you at sunrise and pin the act upon your aunt's guests, to frame a tragedy that would mask his theft of the codicil and letters. The secondary theft was to ensure that his leverage remained intact." He slid the crimson ribbon toward her. "And this ribbon was torn from his uniform sash. He thought no one would trace it to him among silken gowns and tailored coats." Evangeline clutched her shawl. I had no idea." "He counted on your presence and your confusion to shield him," Poirot said. "But he overlooked one detail, a pearl with the scent of your cologne, left behind in his rush to recover the codicil." He drew a second scrap of writing from his pocket. "And this note, found burned in your aunt's hearth, bears his trembling hand, not yours." At that moment, the library door opened with a soft click, and Sergeant Bennet entered, composed in his butler's livery, but pallid. Poirot did not startle him. Instead, he spoke in a low, gravely tone. "Sergeant, join us!" Bennet's expression betrayed no surprise, only the thin mask of duty. "Sir, Bennet replied, bowing with formal courtesy. Poirot offered him a seat. "You have served faithfully, and yet your rank rests heavily upon you. Explain the meaning of your initials and your note." Bennet's eyes flicked to the codicil. He drew a breath, then spoke in a steady voice, though the tremor in his hand betrayed him. "Madame entrusted me with the safe keeping of her private papers. The codicil promised security for Mr. Halcroft, her nephew. I feared his welfare would suffer if the estate fell into unsound hands." He paused. "So I devised a plan. Remove the codicil, stage a threat to unite Lady Rathbone's guests, then secure the estate forever under Gerald's stewardship, with Lady Rathbone grateful to me." Poirot's gaze was unyielding. "And the threat of murder at sunrise?" Bennet bowed his head. "A ruse meant to keep them here. I never wished harm. The pearl and the glove were distractions, tools of misdirection." His voice cracked. "But Miss Lowe discovered my staging and interfered. I panicked, struck the plank too deeply, and left the fragment behind the portrait while retrieving the codicil." Evangeline sobbed. "You would have killed me! For money!" Bennet's shoulders slumped. "I would have hurt no one, I swear it, but I feared exposure. I tried only to frighten, to ensure cooperation. I miscalculated." Poirot stood and placed a gentle hand upon Bennet's shoulder. "Fear is a dangerous ally, Sergeant. You let it guide your actions beyond service." He looked to me. "Hastings, fetch the constables." As I left to summon them, Poirot addressed Bennet quietly. "Your intentions were divided between loyalty and self-interest. Now, you must answer for your betrayals." Moments later, 2 constables entered to take Bennet into custody. He allowed them to escort him without struggle, head bowed but eyes clear with resigned dignity. Poirot turned to Evangeline. "You, too, shall answer for the codicil's theft, but your motive was art, not malice, and you have aided in revealing the truth." In Evangeline's tears subsided into quiet acceptance. Poirot surveyed us all, voice softening. "The confrontation reveals the heart of the matter, fear, loyalty, and the peril of secrets. Our game moves now to its final act, the clearing of the bridge and the restoration of justice before another dawn arrives." Outside, the light waned as clouds drifted across the sun. Within the library, hearts had been laid bare, and the true culprit unmasked. Yet the final revelation still lay ahead, waiting upon the silent boards of that weathered footbridge. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape night had fallen once more over Greystone Manor, when an urgent knock shattered the library's uneasy calm. Inspector Japp burst in, eyes wide. "Monsieur Poirot, Sergeant Bennet has escaped his guards." A hush fell. Poirot's moustache quivered with controlled alarm. "Impossible! He was under close watch." He rose at once. "Gather what evidence remains. Hastings, come with me. Japp, secure the exits. Lady Rathbone, remain here until instructed." We hurried through torchlit corridors to the east wing, where Bennet had been confined. The door stood ajar, its lock splintered. A single glove lay on the floor, dark brown leather, flecked with dust and a trace of blood. Poirot crouched to examine it, then pressed his lips together. "He fled with the codicil," Poirot said quietly. "He intended to destroy it before dawn." He rose and fixed Japp with a steady glance. "We must anticipate his route. the footbridge. Moments later, we emerged into the frosted courtyard. The moon glinted off the river, and beyond, the weathered footbridge stretched its dim silhouette across the water. Hastings and I joined Poirot and Japp in cautious pursuit, the manor's windows dark behind us. "Bennet knows these grounds well," Poirot murmured. "He served as sergeant. He patrols in his mind. He will use the service stairwell, faster than the main path." We crossed the lawn and descended the narrow stone steps. At the base, a splash echoed upstream, and I saw a roll of parchment drifting in the eddies, the codicil half unfurled, its ink bleeding into the water. Japp dipped a hand into the cold flow and retrieved it, waterlogged but intact. Poirot took it gently. Saved for the moment. Then we heard hurried footsteps beyond the reeds. A figure dashed from the shadow of the willow, brandishing a penknife, the very one used to carve the bridge plank. Bennet's uniform was dishevelled, his face drawn with desperation. Poirot stepped forward calmly. "Sergeant Bennet, cease this folly at once." Bennet darted toward the bridge and began loosening a plank with furious swipes of the blade. "I will end it all, destroy the proof, and then no one will have the satisfaction of my failure." I moved to intercept him, but he fended me off, eyes wild. Japp called for him to drop the knife, but Bennet lurched onward, prying the wood free. Poirot's voice rang out. "Monsieur, think! The very plank you wish to remove will seal your fate. You will drown with your secrets." Bennet paused, knife raised, trembling. The plank gave way under his weight, water sluicing beneath his feet. In that instant, Poirot launched himself forward, gripping Bennet by the cuff. "Hastings!" And Japp closed in, wrenching the knife from his hand as he stumbled, arms flailing. "Enough!" Poirot's tone was firm but gentle. "Your desperation has cost you more than you know." Bennet collapsed, sodden and shivering, as Japp cuffed him. "You'll see justice, Sergeant," Japp said grimly. Poirot knelt by the open river. "Look, Hastings!" He pointed to the wash of crimson silk caught in the broken edge of the wood, a last fragment from the ribbon tangled in the grain. Even now, the smallest trace remains. I nodded, awed by Poirot's vigilance. He gathered the scrap in a glassine envelope. Then he turned to Japp. "Secure him in the lodge until morning. Miss Bennet may not have intended murder outright, but he risked many lives, and nearly destroyed what he feared most." We helped Bennet to his feet. He no longer struggled, tears mingling with the chill mist on his cheeks. Poirot placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Sergeant, fear twisted your loyalty into betrayal. You will answer for your crimes, but perhaps, with time, understand how fidelity can falter." As Japp led Bennet away, Poirot guided Hastings to the broken plank. The footbridge, once silent witness to threats and schemes, now bore the scars of desperation. Yet the codicil lay safe in Poirot's coat pocket, and the dagger's edge had been snatched from the river's grasp. Poirot paused, gazing at the still water. Our murderer's final gambit has failed. The bridge endures, and with it, the truth. He touched my arm. "Come, Hastings. We have one more act to perform before justice is complete." Behind us, the manor's lights glowed warmly against the night sky. The desperate attempt to escape had been thwarted, but the threads of the mystery remained woven tight, and Poirot, ever watchful, stood ready to unravel the rest. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. The following morning, the chill had lifted and the gardens glimmered with early dew, but inside Greystone Manor the atmosphere remained charged. Poirot summoned Inspector Japp and me to the library before the others were roused. He stood by the hearth, hands behind, his back, as though gathering strength for a final insight. "Mes amis," he said quietly, "we now possess all the pieces of this intricate puzzle. Yet one final fragment, barely perceived, binds them together and completes the picture of our culprit." He motioned to the low table where the ivory-handled penknife, the crimson ribbon fragments, the codicil, and the journal page lay in silent array. I leaned forward. "What is this last clue, Monsieur Poirot?" He smiled, removing a small circular metal case from his waistcoat pocket. "The pearl." Opening it, he revealed the single lustrous bead we had recovered from beneath, the bridge. Originally I noted its smooth surface and rare provenance, but I neglected one detail: its faint aroma. He withdrew a slender glass vial and uncapped it. "A drop of solution from this reagent," he explained, "designed to reveal organic residues, reacts with compounds found in tobacco smoke. With a drop, the pearl's sheen shifted, faintly iridescent where the reagent touched. See how the surface glows? That, Hastings, is the unmistakable trace of pipe tobacco." I nodded, recalling whose rooms carried that tobacco's scent. "Sergeant Bennett's. He kept his private stash in the service corridor." "Precisely," Poirot confirmed. He set the pearl down gently and picked up the knife. "Next, consider the blade scratch on the bridge plank. We cast that impression and knew the width matched this penknife. Yet the cut was curious, angled away from the heart. That implies the wielder stood on the far side of the bridge, facing north." He turned to Japp. "Inspector, review the footprint evidence." Japp produced his notebook. 2 boot prints, one of Colonel Huxley, one of Sergeant Bennett. But the shallower print, leading upstream, belonged to a smaller slippered foot, Evangel. He checked his notes. "Miss Lowe's slippers." He looked up. But those prints interlaced in a peculiar fashion. First Bennett's boot, then the slipper, then Bennett's boot again. It indicates Bennett escorted her, perhaps unwittingly, then returned alone. Poirot nodded. And why escort Miss Lowe? To frame her, ensure confusion. He set down the knife and picked up the glove fragment. This leather piece we found, behind the portrait, matched Bennett's hand-worn glove exactly, down to the slight stitched irregularity. He placed the fragment beside a photograph of Bennett from his service days. He did not anticipate that, by retrieving his discarded glove and slipping it behind the frame, he would preserve the trace of his own betrayal. Japp looked troubled. So, he staged the glove drop on the bridge for misdirection, but lost. A fragment here. He tapped the fragment, enough to fingerprint the cut edges. Poirot smiled. Indeed, but the final piece is temporal. He produced a pocket watch. Note the codicil's watermark. It dates from 1918. Yet the journal page he removed bore August 1924 ink. He clicked the watch's lid closed. He stole the codicil first, then returned for the journal page 2 nights later. In that interval, he believed no one watched him, but the broken plank was replaced, and its fresh splintering concealed by the morning dew. He placed the watch on the table. The codicil's theft occurred at midnight, as the note warned. The journal page was removed at approximately 10:15 p.m., the hour Lady Rathbone wrote her letters for Miss Lowe, making Evangeline's absence an ideal cover. He traced his finger across the table. Thus, the timeline: midnight raid for the codicil, journal page removal earlier, deployment of the first threat note, staging of the second attack, attempted framing of Huxley and Lowe, finally, the desperate escape. I exhaled, all by Bennet. Poirot inclined his head. Yes, Hastings. Every step was planned. The sergeant's knowledge of hidden compartments, his service route across the footbridge, his penknife's carving of the plank, his torn uniform sash for the ribbon, the blood-stained glove to dramatize a violent altercation, the tobacco residue unnoticed until we tested the pearl, and ultimately his flight when cornered. He straightened, folding his arms before the mantel. We must now prepare for the final gathering, where I shall present each of these elements to Lady Rathbone and her guests and watch their faces as the full truth is laid bare. Japp closed his notebook. We'll assemble them in the drawing-room. Poirot nodded. At precisely 3 this afternoon. Until then, Hastings, we shall ensure the codicil and journal page are restored to Madam's safekeeping. And you, he turned to Japp, will quietly see that Sergeant Bennet is held in the lodge under vigilant guard. As we departed the library, I felt the weight of Poirot's final clue settle around us like a mantle of inevitability. The web of deceit was complete, and now it would be unravelled, plank by plank, by the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 15. The Final Gathering. By mid-afternoon, the drawing-room at Greystone Manor exuded a charged stillness. The grand curtains were drawn, leaving only the soft glow of shaded lamps to illuminate the high ceiling, and the rows of ancestral portraits that gazed down with silent judgment. Poirot stood near the mantelpiece, flanked by Inspector Japp and Dr. Franklin, while I positioned myself discreetly by the piano, ready to assist as needed. Beyond the heavy doors waited Lady Rathbone and the assembled guests. Sir Geoffrey Murray, in formal resignation, Evangeline Lowe, composed yet pale, Colonel Huxley, quietly resolute, and Gerald Halcroft, standing vigilantly at his aunt's side. Hush fell as Poirot raised a gloved hand. Mes amis, thank you for joining us once more. Today we conclude our inquiry. Each of you played a part in events that unfolded upon this modest footbridge and within the walls of this estate. It is time to review the facts and allow truth to emerge from the shadows. He turned to the low table before him, upon which lay the key pieces of evidence: the ivory-handled penknife, the single pearl in its glassine case, the torn fragments of ribbon, the codicil sealed in its ivory box, and the salvaged journal page. Let us begin, Poirot said. First, the pearl. He lifted the vial. This South Sea pearl was removed from Madame's locket at midnight, then dropped beneath the bridge. Why? Not as an act of violence, but as a symbol of tears, an intentional signpost left by our culprit to mislead. He placed the pearl down. He reached for the penknife. This instrument carved the scratch upon the bridge plank. Note its blade width, matching the impression exactly. It belongs to one who carried it concealed, an officer of His Majesty's forces turned domestic. "Servant, Sergeant Bennet!" He tapped the knife. Yet no crime of violence occurred then, because the pearl was the true quarry. Poirot eyed Sir Geoffrey. "Monsieur Murray discovered the pearl first, but your glove, as you admitted, would not gouge the wood so deeply. You found it after the other signs were planted, and retrieved only the journal page, thinking to delay exposure of Madame's secret." Sir Geoffrey inclined his head, expression resigned. Poirot moved to the ribbon fragments. This crimson ribbon, torn from a uniform sash, was strewn upon both the bridge and the desk compartment. "You believed it would implicate a female hand, Miss Lowe's gown trim, or perhaps Colonel Huxley's scarlet waistcoat. Instead, it bore the distinctive weave of the sergeant's service sash." He let the fragments lie. Evangeline's breath caught, but her posture remained polite. Poirot offered a curt nod to her, then continued. Next, the codicil itself. Stolen at midnight from the hidden compartment beneath Lady Rathbone's inkwell, it was carried through the Secret Service stairwell, past corridors, and unseen by most. Only Madame's closest circle knew of that hiding place. He glared gently at Gerald. "You, Monsieur Halcroft, and the housekeeper both had knowledge, but both were accounted for by their movements and testimonies." Poirot paused, allowing the weight of the accusation to settle. "Then the journal page," he said, lifting the recovered parchment. "Removed 2 nights prior, to conceal the intended meeting between Madame and her brother-in-law's confidant. The removal required lifting the portrait from the wall, a task accomplished twice, once to glimpse its contents, and again to recover the codicil." He turned to Lady Rathbone. "Madame, you planned to confront S at midnight. The note you discovered, beware S, refers not to a departed soul, but to one among us." Her hand trembled around Gerald's elbow. Poirot's gaze swept the room. "Now, consider the timeline. The journal page removed at 10:15 p.m., the codicil at midnight, the pearl dropped shortly thereafter, the second threat staged in the early hours, the framed second attack on Colonel Huxley, and finally the desperate escape attempt upon discovery." He leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper that nevertheless carried to every corner. "Each piece fits. The blade, the ribbon, the glove fragments, the tobacco residue on the pearl, traces of pipe smoke unique to Sergeant Bennet, were all his own doing. His service past gave him both access and cunning." Poirot paused as Inspector Japp produced a small bundle of arrested evidence. Bennet's service cap, his sash, the torn glove, and the tobacco pouch. Japp laid them on the table. The assembled guests exchanged uneasy glances. Poirot turned to Sergeant Bennet, ushered reluctantly into the room in custody. Bennet's head was bowed, guilt evident in every line of his posture. "Sergeant Bennet," Poirot said calmly, "you acted to protect the estate and your favour with Madame, yet the ladder of fear is slippery. You risked murder by staging, threats, and nearly extinguished justice itself when you attempted to flee." Bennet's voice quivered. I was loyal. I feared for Monsieur Halcroft's inheritance, and for Lady Rathbone's estate falling into turmoil. I never meant bloodshed." Poirot inclined his head. "Intent alone cannot clear the path of consequences. You will answer for theft, conspiracy, and attempted framing, yet I trust your honesty now shown as you confessed when cornered." He turned to the assembly. "Mes amis, our gathering today has showcased the perils of secrets kept too long. The pearl concealed, the codicil hidden, the letters buried. Each secret bred fear, fear that drove a loyal servant to betrayal." Lady Rathbone's voice broke the hush. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for restoring my faith and returning my papers. Though my trust was shaken, I know now that no one here acted without emotion guiding him." Poirot offered her the ivory box. "Your codicil, madame, restored. To you." He then addressed each guest in turn, commending them for their cooperation and acknowledging their vulnerabilities with compassion. Finally, he stepped back and surveyed the room with quiet satisfaction. "Let this final gathering mark the end of our drama. The stage is clear, the culprit revealed, and justice poised to be served. May you all find peace once more." As the guests departed, Gerald escorted his aunt, and Evangeline gathered her belongings with gentle dignity. Colonel Huxley stood by the hearth, offering his respectful condolences. Sir Geoffrey, though arrested, nodded in solemn acknowledgment. Inspector Japp remained to oversee Bennet's removal, while Poirot and I lingered by the window, gazing at the silent footbridge laid bare under the afternoon light. In the hush that followed, Poirot turned to me. "Hastings, the final gathering has done its work. Now, only the reveal remains, when each truth is laid before every heart. But that, mon cher ami, we leave for the next and final chapter." Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, as though carrying away the last echoes of deceit. Inside Greystone Manor, tension gave way to relief, and the final gathering paved the way for justice's consummation at the bridge where all had begun. Chapter 16. The reveal. Late that afternoon, the sky above Greystone Manor was brushed with rose and gold as the setting sun prepared to slip behind distant hills. Poirot summoned the remaining guests, Lady Rathbone, Evangeline Lowe, Colonel Huxley, and Gerald Halcroft, to the weathered footbridge, the very scene of so many secrets. Inspector Japp and Dr. Franklin accompanied us, each man and woman shrouded in a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. We crossed the frost-glimmering lawn in silence, the crunch of gravel echoing like a heartbeat. At the bridge's entrance, Poirot paused and turned to face us, his little grey cells alight with satisfaction. "Mes amis," he began, voice perfectly calm, "we return to the stage of our drama, where each gesture and token played its part. Today, in this final moment before sunset, I shall expose the true culprit and explain precisely how each thread of deceit was woven." He motioned to the northern planks, where the scratch cut deep and the pearl had lain. "Observe the scratch once more," he said, crouching to run a gloved finger along the wood's grain. "This mark was carved not by accident, but by intent. It served to divert the eye from the pearl, stolen for leverage, and to implicate Colonel Huxley by suggesting a violent altercation." The Colonel met Poirot's gaze calmly. Poirot rose and turned to Sir Geoffrey's empty spot, then swept his arm across the bridge. Yet that blade did not belong to any gentleman's dress sword, nor to a novelist's theatrical prop. It belonged to Sergeant Bennet, whose service in India required a sturdy penknife. And the width of this cut matches his blade exactly. He stepped back, placing a small sample of dust at the scratch's edge. That dust, lifted by Hastings, contained fibres of red silk from Bennet's uniform sash, torn when he struck the plank. He intended the ribbon fragments to mislead you toward Miss Lowe or Sir Geoffrey, yet overlooked the microscopic strands upon the wood. Evangeline's eyes widened, though her expression remained composed. Poirot advanced to the bridges, midpoint, where the pearl's glassine case now rested in his hand. Here lay the pearl, he continued, a symbol of tears and of entrapment. It was removed from Madame's locket and carried to this bridge, where it was allowed to slip from the thief's pocket, in order to cement suspicion upon one of you. He lifted the pearl. Yet this South Sea pearl bears the faint residue of tobacco, a signature of Sergeant Bennet's beloved pipe mixture. No other person here smokes that blend. He laid the pearl gently upon a plank. This pearl binds the theft to the hand that holds the pipe. Next, Poirot crouched again, pointing to a faint muddy footprint at the water's edge. Here, the smaller slipper print of Miss Lowe appeared, but only after Bennet escorted her unwittingly, guiding her beneath the moonlight so the print might confuse our investigation. He turned to Evangeline. "You walked here briefly, yet required no escort to admire the view." She drew a breath and met his gaze without fear. Poirot straightened and addressed Colonel Huxley. "Your boot imprint appears on this side of the bridge, where you retrieved your penknife the night of the staged attack. But the scratch's angle, left to right, indicates the wielder stood on the upstream side, facing north. That was Bennet, crossing and recrossing these planks by rote, as he once patrolled them in uniform. He climbed onto a central plank, motioning for us to gather close. The wooden boards creaked beneath his weight, a note of dramatic tension. "Now, consider the missing documents," he said, lifting the ivory box containing the codicil. The codicil was removed from the desk's hidden compartment at midnight. Bennet fled through the Secret Service stairwell, past the library, and out, here to the bridge, his chosen ridicule stage. He meant to destroy the codicil, but instead revealed his design when he dropped it into the river's current, only to recover it later. He opened the box, revealing the codicil's pristine sheets. He attempted to eliminate evidence of his wager on the estate's future, so that Lady Rathbone might be forced into uncertainty, and perhaps into his debt. He closed the box and slipped it back inside his coat. Poirot's gaze swept the group. Finally, the journal page, torn from Madame's private writings, was removed 2 nights ago, when Bennet tested our vigilance. He lifted the portrait here, he indicated the iron railings, and slipped the page into his pocket. He believed that by destroying the note in the hearth, he would erase his trail. Instead, he left a charred fragment that matched his trembling handwriting. Lady Rathbone's hand flew to her throat. "But why, Sergeant Bennet?" Poirot's moustache twitched in empathy. "You entrusted him. He was your faithful butler and former sergeant. He believed that safeguarding your interests meant manipulating your future, binding you and your nephew to his perceived loyalty. In his mind, the ends justified every means." He turned to Inspector Japp. "Mon ami, you may place the handcuffs upon Sergeant Bennet in the lodge. The evidence here is incontrovertible. He stands guilty of theft, conspiracy, and attempted framing, crimes born of fear and misplaced fidelity." Japp departed to fetch Bennet. Poirot addressed the remaining guests. Mes amis, trust is both the foundation and the fault line of every human relationship. When trust fractures, fear seeps in, and fear can drive us beyond reason. He nodded to each in turn. Lady Rathbone, her eyes bright with gratitude. Evangeline, whose dignity remained unbowed. Colonel Huxley, his military bearing unshaken, and Gerald, whose vigilant presence spoke of devotion. Moments later, Sergeant Bennet was led forth, head lowered, but eyes meeting each of ours. He halted at the bridge's entry. Poirot stepped forward and spoke directly to him. Sergeant, your loyalty to Lady Rathbone led you into perilous waters. You navigated secrets and staged threats, but you forgot that truth has a way of drifting ashore. He offered a small smile. May you find in justice the chance to understand how trust, once broken, can be rebuilt only by contrition. Japp took Bennet by the arm. Your ride awaits at the lodge. Let us go. As Bennet passed beyond the railing, the rustle of his coat seemed to ripple through the air, as though the bridge itself sighed in relief. Poirot turned to me. Hastings, the reveal is done. The final act awaits, the restoration of harmony and the closing of this chapter. But for now, we stand upon these boards, witnesses to the power of the little grey cells. He gazed at the tranquil water flowing beneath us, sunlight glinting off its surface. I nodded, awed by his artistry. The reveal had been flawless, each clue laid bare, each motive exposed. And as we walked back toward the manor, the bridge held its secrets no more, surrendered to justice and to the gentle authority of Hercule Poirot's insight. Chapter 17. Outcome and Justice. In the days that followed, the dramatic reveal on the weathered footbridge Greystone Manor settled into a fragile calm. Autumn leaves drifted across manicured lawns, and the first frost of November crept along the hedges. Yet within the grand drawing-room, hearts were still stirred by the aftermath of betrayal and the promise of restitution. Sergeant Bennet once, the stalwart butler and former soldier, was quietly conveyed to the lodge, pending his escort to London. Lady Rathbone visited him before his departure, her composure dignified, yet tinged with sorrow. "John," she said softly, using the first name he had shared only in confidence, "I cannot condone what you did, but I understand why." Her voice wavered. "You acted out of devotion, though misdirected. I hope you find peace in consequence." Bennet bowed his head. "Madam, my actions were folly. I betrayed your trust while seeking to protect it. For that, I accept whatever justice deems fit." Lady Rathbone placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Go with my forgiveness, John, and the hope that you may rebuild your life beyond these walls." Miss Evangeline Lowe faced her own reckoning in the local magistrate's court for the theft of the codicil and the journal page. Though her motive, artistic curiosity, born of genuine affection for the estate, could not excuse her actions, her contrition and cooperation earned her a lenient sentence, a fine, restitution of damages, and a formal apology to Lady Rathbone and the manor's staff. She returned to her writing. Her first post-trial poem, a tribute to the fragile nature of trust and the redemptive power of truth. Colonel Huxley offered his assistance to local veterans' charities as penance for leasing Lady Rathbone's name. in his financial appeals. He remained a respected figure, his honour intact after being exonerated of all suspicion of violence. He and Lady Rathbone repaired their friendship over shared letters, her admiration for his service matched by his gratitude for her steadfast belief in his integrity. Gerald Halcroft, now fully installed as master of Greystone Manor, worked alongside Lady Rathbone to restore the estate's reputation. He reorganised the household, implementing new safeguards for valuable papers and heirlooms. His loyalty never wavered. He visited Bennet in the lodge to offer quiet support, ensuring the former butler understood that his service had been valued, even if misguided. Sir Geoffrey Murray was quietly released from custody when Inspector Japp confirmed that his only crime was interference, not malice. He received a caution and departed for London to resume writing, his next novel inspired by the events at Greystone, though he promised to alter the ending to spare his publisher's nerves. At last, the codicil and the journal page were safely returned to Lady Rathbone's possession. She locked them in a new steel safe, its combination known only to herself and Gerald. When she reflected upon the ordeal, she found in her heart both regret for the secrets she had kept and gratitude for the little grey cells that unravelled them. One crisp morning, I found Poirot standing alone on the footbridge, gazing at the flowing water as if it still bore echoes of last night's drama. I joined him silently, the boards creaking underfoot. He turned, his waxed moustache curving in, a gentle smile. "Hastings, justice has been done, but more importantly, peace has been restored." He placed a gloved hand upon the railing. "Each life touched by this affair has been altered, some by loss, some by redemption." His eyes drifted to the distant manor. "Yet the greatest justice is within oneself. The courage to confront one's own motives, the humility to accept the consequences, and the wisdom to rebuild trust." I nodded, taking in the beauty of the morning mist lifting over the river. "It is a hard lesson, but perhaps a necessary one." Poirot's gaze followed a fallen leaf drifting downstream. "Indeed, for no secret, however buried, can remain concealed forever, and no bond once tested can be mended without honest reflection." As we crossed back toward the manor, the crisp air carried a sense of renewal. The bridge, scene of peril, deception, and ultimate justice, stood serene once more. In its silent witness, one could imagine the echoes of footsteps past, the whispered threats, and the triumphant clarity of Poirot's deductions. Back in the drawing-room, Lady Rathbone greeted us with warmth. "Monsieur Poirot, Hastings," she said, her eyes bright. "Thank you for restoring my home and my faith." She offered him a cup of tea. "You have done more than unravel a mystery. You've reminded us of the value of truth." Poirot bowed, accepting the tea. "Madame, it was my privilege. Every case teaches us something of human nature." He sipped thoughtfully. "And this one, perhaps most of all, that the greatest crime is not the act itself, but the breach of trust it entails." As the afternoon light filtered through the stained glass windows, I felt a gentle closing of the circle, of mystery, of tension, and of human frailty. And though one final chapter remained, the closing remark that would send everyone on their way. A peaceful resolution had already been woven through each heart and each life at Greystone Manor. Chapter 18. The Closing Remark. The drawing-room of Greystone Manor was awash in the glow of the setting sun, its stained glass windows casting kaleidoscopic patterns across the carpet. The guests, those who remained after the turmoil, had gathered once more. Lady Rathbone, dignified yet softened by recent trials. Evangeline Lowe, contemplative and beginning to sketch new verses in a small notebook. Colonel Huxley, quietly engaged in conversation with Dr. Franklin about veterans' affairs. And Gerald Halcroft, standing near his aunt with the assured air of the manor's new master. Monsieur Poirot and I entered to find the atmosphere one of gentle camaraderie, an unspoken testament to restored trust. Poirot took his customary place by the fireplace, his little grey cells still alert even after the storm of events. He unclasped his overcoat, laid aside his cane, and allowed himself a moment to survey the scene. The ancestral portraits watching silently, the furniture arranged as if nothing untoward had ever transpired, and the warm hearth ready to banish any lingering chill. Mes amis, he began, his voice low yet resonant. Our mystery at Greystone Manor has drawn to its natural close. Today we celebrate not merely the unmasking of a culprit, but the triumph of truth and the resilience of human bonds. He turned first to Lady Rathbone, who held her teacup lightly in both hands. Madame, you have endured betrayals from those you trusted most, both friend and servant, yet you have shown forgiveness where many would not. That is the true heart of justice. He inclined his head. Lady Rathbone's eyes glistened, and she offered him a grateful smile. Poirot then addressed Evangeline, seated with her notebook upon her knee. Miss Lowe, your journey from poet to penitent has been painful but instructive. You sought inspiration in secrecy, and found instead that the greatest verses arise from transparency. I trust your next collection will honour the lessons learned. Evangeline bowed her head and murmured, Merci, Monsieur Poirot. He moved to Colonel Huxley, who stood in his usual erect posture. Colonel, your valour in foreign lands has now proven your integrity here at home. You weathered false accusations with dignity, and in doing so reminded us that justice is not merely the absence of guilt, but the preservation of honour. The Colonel inclined his head in acknowledgment, his eyes reflecting sincere appreciation. Finally, Poirot turned to Gerald. Monsieur Halcroft, you have borne witness to loss, of papers, of friendship, of certainty, but you have responded not with resentment, but with renewal. This estate is as much yours as it is your aunt's, and in your stewardship it will thrive on honesty and vigilance. Gerald's jaw softened into a smile. I shall strive to honour your counsel, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot's moustache quivered in a rare display of warmth. He took a step back and let silence settle, as if granting the moment its full weight. Then, with a slight flourish, he produced from his coat a slender gilt matchbox, one he had reserved for the grand finale of his revelations. Et maintenant, mes amis, he said, striking a match, we come to the closing remark. The flame danced, held aloft against the dimming light. In every crime there is a spark that ignites a chain of events, and in every investigation the detective must kindle that same spark of curiosity. But the true fire that warms our lives is kindled by trust. He set the matchbox and extinguished the match, the echo of its hiss soft in the hush, and a mystery may entertain us, as this one has done, but its resolution teaches us more than the mere triumph of logic. It reveals the fragility of relationships, the potency of fear, and the redemption that truth affords. Lady Rathbone rose and approached Poirot, placing a hand gently upon his shoulder. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you not only for solving this case, but for guiding us back to one another." He bowed, then turned to me. "Hastings, will you take my cane?" I stepped forward, offering it to him. He accepted it thoughtfully, tapping the carved handle upon the hearth's polished stone, as if to set a final seal upon our endeavour. "Let the footbridge remain," he said quietly, "not as a relic of our suspicions, but as a symbol that crossings in life can be perilous, yet they lead to new shores when navigated with honesty. May Greystone Manor stand ever as a testament to that truth." With that, he raised his eyebrows in that unmistakable signal that the matter was concluded. A gentle applause rippled through the room, heartfelt and sincere. As twilight fell and the lamps were lit, I observed each guest carry away not only a story of suspense and resolution, but the deeper understanding that human hearts, like delicate mechanisms, require care and clarity. And in that understanding lay the final triumph of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells, not merely to solve a crime, but to illuminate the hidden pathways of the human soul. Thus ended the affair at the Weathered. Footbridge and peace returned to Greystone Manor, its bonds strengthened by the very truths that once threatened to shatter them.